The first thing I think many of you may be aware of is that I am not Celia Daniel, right? We all laugh. She's stuck in traffic. She's on her way. She's apologized. And so she said, Rhea, you can do this. Yes.
Now the Dr. Dillon is
Okay.
now you can start.
Oh, because you mean you didn't film all of that? Seriously? I was on a roll. Okay, all right. No, that's okay. But anyway, I am Professor Ballard Thrower, and I'm the new Executive Director of the University Libraries. And so I would like to welcome you to Founders, and hopefully I'm being taped now, right? Okay, there we go. And once again, I'm going to just do the preliminary part of the program, the welcome, and introduce our speaker today on behalf of Ms. Daniel, who actually is on her way, and she will be here. One of the things that, just to give you a brief history, I actually came from the law school, so I'm not new to Howard. So I was actually director of the law library, but I'm new to main campus. And during my interview with Dr. Frederick, he mentioned a lot about the silos. Now, I actually really identify with silos because I'm from Ohio. I actually have friends who were, who actually farmed. I had friends who raised cattle, grain, all that stuff. And so I understand the concept of why you have the programs. And look, she just walked in all her beautiful, there we go, we're all gonna look at you. But now I get to finish my Ohio story and then I'll pass it off. So the concept is that you want to keep the grain separate. So if you grow wheat, you have one silo, and you have rye, you put it in another one. So from a farming perspective, it's really, really a good thing. In fact, because you don't want all your grains to mix together. But in an academic and business institution, not such a good thing, right? Because you really want a synergy, because you all have a common mission. And if everyone is focused on their own, concepts and, goals, then you don't actually propel the whole university forward, right? So this was one of the things that when I talked to Celia and we talked about different activities that the university libraries could do for the 150th, it was really important that I wanted to do it with someone else, because I thought it was really important that we break down that concept of silos. So even though I'm speaking here on behalf of the university libraries, I want to definitely give a shout out to the African Studies Department and African American History Department, because they were involved in this whole activity that we had today. And it would not have been possible without their assistance. And together we worked on this and came up with this concept. And so now I get to pass it on. And I did a pretty good job being Celia Daniel. Thank you. And all right, but this is my opportunity to actually introduce Miss Daniel, who literally is, she is a force of nature. For those of you who know Celia, right? And so when I approached her about, I want to do something, to celebrate libraries and that we work together with the other departments. And so this was one of the ideas that she came up with. And I really, on behalf of me personally, want to thank her for her contribution. And I'm going to step aside. There you go.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I have to apologize to my boss. She's terrific, but today I cut it a bit short, and a 16-wheeler just did not cooperate with me, and it overturned. So I have to thank my better angels, because I feel that had I been earlier, I might have gotten into the mix. So, it's always... So thank you, everybody, for coming out. And once again, I'm sorry. Welcome to the browsing room. I don't know how much you did.
Just welcome.
Welcome to the browsing room. Welcome to Founders. And welcome to Charter Day Essay Contest Presentation Day. And this is a culmination of about 3 months of hard work by our students and by some of our faculty advisors. And today we celebrate them for a job well done. So I have to acknowledge some people, Executive Director, and, well, she is already, she's a patron of this activity, and you've heard her. And I was supposed to speak about her, and I think I still will, because most of you don't know her because she has been for 16 years over in the law library. The social justice appeal of Howard University Law. That's what got her here with us. It says that the social justice appeal is the fair and proper administration of law, conforming to natural law that all persons, irrespective of ethnic origin, gender, possessions, race, religion, etc., are to be treated equally and without prejudice. And this is one of the reasons why she came to Howard Law School. To Howard Law School. The other reason was that her family have a kind of legacy affiliation with Howard, and she wanted to keep that thing going. I did some research on you. You think I didn't? And so those were the two reasons that brought her here. But she likes to say that she's a Midwestern baby, to put herself back, you know. But she's a force to be reckoned with, this lady. And so she was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. She did her first degree in Cincinnati, which is not far from Toledo, Ohio. She did her second degree in Kentucky, not far from Toledo, Ohio, and her MILS in Michigan, Ann Arbor. So anybody who has done a JD degree, you think that they're gonna just hit to Wall Street and make a whole bunch of money. This baby over here went to library school because she wanted to do something better not better, not really running after the cash, but doing something more for humanity. And so she left and she went to Texas, the University of Texas at Austin. And she worked there as a reference librarian for 2 years, but she didn't really want to stay there because she was not able to teach. So she left there and she went to the State University of Georgia, and she was the associate director of the law library there. And she spent 11 years there, and she did a lot of teaching for adult students, which she loves. But she really was making all those detours because her crowning glory was to come here. And so in 2001, she came here. See, I know everything about you. In 2001, she came here, and she has spent all those years over in the law school as director. And in 2016, she was appointed executive director of Howard University Libraries and Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. And apart from all of that, I wanted to read a few of them. She's a prolific writer. She writes for the Encyclopedia of African American Education. She writes about profiling minority law. She writes a lot about the black community and her own community, because she said, if you don't write about your own community, then other people will write what they think your community is about. And so we have this dynamic person here with us, and we're so happy, Dr. Professor Ria Balatroa. Okay, so we did not have the guest speaker. She was supposed to introduce the guest speaker. I guess at this point.
Okay, I'm gonna come back up.
You're gonna come back up as the guest speaker? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
I feel like that I ought to be the guest speaker, but I'm not.
Who are you gonna do? Lopez?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm introducing.
Good. That's
I'm
fantastic.
gonna remind my child just how great I am. Hey,
Okay.
Sometimes he ain't feeling that. A teenager looks at me like, really? You know. All right. One of the wonderful things about working at Howard, of course, is that we have so many people that we can tap into. I'm sorry. He knows I'm a walker, and he keeps directing me. I'm sorry. You're lucky I haven't moved over here because I walk and talk and do my hands. I can't wait to see this video. I'm sorry. And so one of the great things about being here is that there's so many people that we can tap into. So unfortunately, Dr. Battle was ill this morning, and he called us very apologetically and said he cannot be here. And so literally, we were like, oh my gosh, who possibly can we get this quick that we know will be dynamic and great and could talk about the concept? We have a person on our staff who can actually do that. That is the phenomenal thing. So it is my pleasure to actually introduce to you, and many of you already know him, but I want to take the time to introduce Dr. Lopez, okay? So Lopez Matthews earned his bachelor's degree in history from Coppin State University and his master's in public health and history and his PhD in history from Howard University. He is currently the manager of the Digital Production Center and the Digital Production Librarian for Howard University Libraries and the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. He is also an adjunct professor in history at Coppin State University, and he is the executive council member on the board for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He's currently is a commissioner on the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, advisory board member for the Banneker Douglas Museum in Annapolis, Maryland, and also a member of the board of directors for the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. And he is most recently an author of The History of Alpha Phi Alpha, Origins of the Eastern Region, which is on Amazon, so you can go get one. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Matthews. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. So you all are here today. As you know, our program is about the founding and impact of Howard University on the world. And so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about just sort of the founding of Howard and why it was important and why it is a special place and continues to be a special place in the world today. And I always like to begin by talking about Oliver Otis Howard, the man. Because to understand why this institution developed the way it did, you have to understand who he was as a person. And so he grew up, his mother was a great influence on him, very pious woman, very religious woman, and very strict. And he was also a very strict person. If you read his autobiography, he gives detailed accounts of other people and how they behave and their various deficiencies in his eyes. Like he describes one man as short and fat with a round head and a head bigger than his brain because he wasn't that smart. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you wrote this in your autobiography, so it's printed. But he led his life by living to a proverb called, be sure you are right and then go ahead. And so once he felt like he was right and his idea was the correct idea, he plowed ahead no matter what anyone had to say. And so his classmates when he was a child, his classmates at West Point, and his fellow soldiers when he was in the Army viewed him often with disdain. And they called him the Christian general, and not as a positive, as a negative. They said he was a stick in the mud. And a lot of people said that he really didn't have any personality. But, well, not personality, but he didn't have a sense of humor, is what they used. Because he had plenty of personality, but he didn't have a sense of humor. So, and this is what you see as you move throughout General Howard's life. His home life was one of discipline and faithfulness to the Christian religion. And what's interesting is he believed that African Americans were equal to whites. He always believed that. He didn't believe that there were any differences between African Americans and whites. He believed that it was slavery that led to the rise of racism. He felt that because of slavery, African Americans behaved in a certain way. And so if you remove those vestiges, racism will just float away and it'll not exist anymore. And so a lot of people fault him for his naivete. But he did say, and I almost missed this quote, "I could never detect the shadow of a reason why the color of the skin should impair the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And so he believed that in destroying slavery and in building institutions like Howard, African Americans would gain the sympathy of whites, and then racism would just float away. And he did this despite hearing many racist statements from his colleagues, because he was very popular, because he lost his arm in the Civil War and he led many battles, and they said, oh, he's a great general. So he was traveling through New Orleans with a congressman, and the congressman stopped him. They saw a group of black children all in a courtyard playing in a field, and they said, and the congressman says to him, "Is this a school?" And he goes, "Yes." And he goes, "What? Of niggers?" And he replies, "Yes, I believe they are colored children." And the man replies, well, I have seen many absurdities in my lifetime, but this is the climax of absurdities. So you know where his mind was. He said, even the idea of a black school is an absurdity. But General Howard said, oh, he's just confused. He felt that way about Andrew Johnson, too. He said Andrew Johnson was just a little confused when it came to black people. But if you know the history of Andrew Johnson, he was a staunch racist and as racist can get. So, but he did sign the charter for Howard, which is interesting. We think he just had it they just shoved it in a stack of papers and he just went to sign it. And all of a sudden, oops, he established a university. Surprise. But he also, when you look at General Howard himself, he felt that blacks were fortunate to have been brought to the United States. He said that of Africa, he said, darkness covereth the land, and gross darkness the people, because he believed that if a land wasn't Christian, then you were all going straight to hell, basically, if you weren't Christian. And so black people were fortunate to be associated with the English language, with Christian institutions, with Europeans, because as time went on, they would be removed from the vestiges of the African continent, and it would better them. So that's what, that's what's going on in the background as he's doing these things, because he's considered the greatest friend of the black man. After the Civil War, that's why they made him head of the Freedmen's Bureau. When they took back the land from General Sherman's Special Order Number 15, which he said, okay, he's going to give every head of African-American households 40 acres and the use of government mules. And then the War Department said, you didn't have the right to do that, so we're taking the land back. They sent General Howard on a speaking tour to tell all the African-Americans, yeah, we're taking this land back. And so he told them that they needed to lay aside their bitter feelings and to become reconciled to their old masters. So just go back and work for your old masters. I know we promised you some land, and I know we're taking it back, but you'll be all right. Just go work with your former masters, and it'll be okay, because you're free now, and racism will go away. That's how he felt. This is what we're dealing with. So keep that in mind. Now, so he heads the Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau has about 900 agents for about 4 million newly freed African Americans. And if you read the newspapers of the day, the US government and Congress prided themselves on the work they did for newly freed African Americans. They said, we have given them, and I just underlined it here, I got to find it. Yeah, they have given them relief from beggary and dependence. And they have given African Americans, and I want to read this quote now just because this is how my mind works. I'm going to find it. Just give me a second. And I'm not going to find it. Oh, here it is. Never mind. So, I can't find it. It's all right. We're going to get to it, though. It's underlined. Oh, here it is, right here. They proceeded to secure their lately enslaved people independence, education, and civil and political equality. That's what the members of Congress claimed that they had given to African Americans at the end of the Civil War. Now, if you have even a cursory knowledge of what happened in this country at the end of the Civil War, you know that that's not true. But that's what they believed they had done. And so when the group got together, the First Congregational Church came together and they decided they wanted to build an institution that educated African Americans. They came together and said, we needed to name this school after Oliver Otis Howard, because they said, who else to name it for? He was the greatest friend of the black man, and it'll give it some reputation. It'll give it a reputation. So they said, okay, we're going to build this school, name it for Oliver Otis Howard. What are we going to build? A school for ministers? No. A school for teachers? No. They decided they wanted to build a university because they said that that was what African Americans needed. They needed a comprehensive education to lift them from the vestiges of slavery. And they believed that it wouldn't necessarily benefit the first generation out of slavery. It would benefit the third generation out of slavery, because Howard would educate the first group and that would lift them up. Then their children would be educated and they would be even further than their parents. But it would be the third group that would be completely removed from the vestiges of slavery and ready for complete assimilation into American society. This was his idea. You know, racism doesn't exist. So it's just going to go away and we're just going to lift and keep progressing and progressing and progressing. But of course we know that didn't happen. So that's why they decided to found Howard as a university. And it was founded for the education of youth in the liberal arts and sciences. So it was never a school for ministers. It was never a school for teachers. And this is where there is some confusion, because the ideas were there, but it was never actually an institution like that. Howard has always been a university since its founding. And because they wanted it to have a comprehensive education, they started it with a normal department, a preparatory department, collegiate department, agricultural department, and a medical department. And then eventually they added a law school and a school of pharmacy, and they started a military department because they felt that Howard needed to have a completely comprehensive education to provide everything for African Americans because it didn't exist. And so it was also interesting because it was not founded, and this caused some controversy later, which I'll get to, but it wasn't founded technically for black people. And they made a point of saying that Howard was not founded as a black school for black people. It was founded as a school for everyone. So white people could come, black people could come, men could come, and women, which was revolutionary at that time, that Howard always allowed women to attend. And Walter Dyson, in his book, The Capstone of Negro Education, even talks about how it became an oddity. And so you had students from other schools applying to come to Howard at the beginning because they wanted to participate in this experiment. You know, you always have those who consider themselves liberal, who says, "Ooh, this is interesting, I want to participate." So you had a lot of folks floating here at Howard. So it really wasn't a majority black school. And they really didn't want to call themselves a black school until the 1930s, when, you know, you get your federal appropriation discussion, and that becomes this is how you're going to get it. Yes, we're a black school now. So Howard is founded as a university. And it wasn't without its controversy. Howard has, from its beginnings, always had controversy. And so with the founding of the university, Congressman Fernando Wood levied charges against Oliver Otis Howard. He brought him on charges in front of Congress. He said that he started this scheme, the erection of this university, for the purpose of raising a monument to the name and fame of General Howard. They said that's why he started this university. And because they used the money from the Freedmen's Bureau to start the university, so he gave the money to the First Congregational Church to buy the land for Howard. Then he gave the money to the First Congregational Church to buy the buildings for Howard. Then he gave the money, then he moved the headquarters of the Freedmen's Bureau to the campus and started paying Howard rent from the Freedmen's Bureau. So people are saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? All this money is just flowing into this university in your name. So he brought him up on charges. And then he said, most grievously, the Freedmen's Bureau money is supposed to help freedmen. But you started a school that isn't even black. He said the school is mostly black, but it contains a significant number of whites, Asians, Latinos, and Africans. So it's not a black school. You have all these other races there going to school. So they brought him up on charges. They said that he, did some funny business with the money. Because I mentioned he bought the land from John Smith. It was a farm, never a plantation, just a farm. But, and then the buildings that were built on the land were built by a company that Oliver Otis Howard owned shares in. So he was a stockholder of the company that built the buildings on the campus. So that looks a little fun. It looks a little funny because, wait a minute. You gave them the money and they're going back to you and your brother? Because his brother owned the land too. And then he built Oliver Otis, his house there, which is the oldest building on campus. He built that. He paid for that himself. He said, I'll pay for this. But then the bricks that were used to build the buildings, not only did he just build the buildings from the company that he owned, the bricks came from another company that he owned. And it was slightly shoddy because the building half collapsed and killed a worker. But they fixed that. They fixed that real quickly. And so he also built Berry Farms, and the money from Berry Farms was to go support Howard, and another university in North Carolina. And they said, oh, that's horrible that he built these houses and they're charging freedmen rent. And he was very popular. Oh, this is what Fernando Wood had to say about Berry Farm. Oh, wait, no, not Fernando Wood. So he brought him up on these charges, and he is acquitted of all charges. Because the bill that established the Freedmen's Bureau said that the commissioner could do whatever he wanted with the money. So it didn't matter that he was shifting money here and shifting money there and paying for this that benefited him. It didn't matter. Because the bill said he could use it for whatever he wanted to. It didn't even say that it had to help the freedmen. It said he had complete discretion, and he used it. And they said it's okay, because what he built was great. They said that Berry Farms was a monument to General Howard's philanthropy, more glorious than any marble shaft or sculptured bust. This is in the Congressional Record, how much they loved General Howard. When he talked about the people who founded Howard, and he said that they were the Freedmen's Bureau ring, moving money around just to support themselves. They said that in the Congressional Record, this is their response in acquitting General Howard. I'm reading from this. It said, they are a noble band of patriots and philanthropists, of missionary associations or educational institutions, of learned and eminent divines, of devoted and benevolent men and women who were willing to leave the comforts of home and the society of relatives and friends for the purpose of carrying the lights of education and religious instruction among the newly enfranchised people of the South, regardless of the brutal assaults of prejudiced mobs or the heartless sneers of educated rebels. And of General Howard himself, they said he was a gallant officer and faithful public servant. So they loved Oliver Otis Howard. They said he's great, and it's okay. It don't matter what he did. He built it. It's there. So y'all just love it and deal with it. They also had some more controversy. Once the university was founded, the First Congregational Church was very involved in the running of the university. They wanted a black president. General Howard said they needed a black president after he resigned. He said, give it to John Mercer Langston. They declined. They gave it to George Whipple. Then he died on a ship, and they gave it to another person, another white man. So Mercer Langston resigns, takes the entire law school faculty with him, and then the university also had financial troubles, which, is a persistent thing throughout the history of Howard. They, what did they have? They had $87,000 in debt, but they only made $70,000 in funding. So they fired the entire administration, made them all come back at half their salary. Problem solved. So, it's a lot of there's a lot of issues going on with the founding of Howard. But even during this day, and despite all this, Howard has been a sort of beacon of education and light for the Black community. And its presence here in the nation's capital was also important because it was an example of the commitment of the United States to the education and support of African Americans. Now, whether that was more rhetoric than reality is up to you, but that was the goal of Howard University, and that was the beginning of its legacy, and you will hear from our student presenters a little more about how that legacy has evolved over the years. Thank you.
Thank you. For short notice, this was fantastic, Dr. Lopez. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Carr, for quick thinking. Dr. Carr. Okay, because I came in a little late, my papers are a bit disjointed. There are certain people that we have to really thank for what they've done in helping us. And from the Department of English, we really want to thank and praise her. This is Professor Dr. Yasmin Digout. She's sitting over there for the tremendous work she did in helping first in laying the groundwork, to help me in laying the groundwork for this activity and for helping me to steer it along. She is the advisor of the writing group, the Sterling Allen Brown Society. And so thank you very, very much, Dr. Digout, for your stellar help. Also, Africana Studies Department under the leadership of Dr. Greg Carr for his germ idea. He always leads me from behind, and then he takes off. But he's always there at the right time. Anyway, like this morning when they said that battle wasn't coming, I said, Greg, battle isn't coming. And I was late, and see, he fixed it. So thank you, Dr. Carr. And also for the generous financial help from the Africana Studies Department. Also from the History Department, under the directorship of Dr. Nikki Taylor and Dr. Edna Medford. Dr. Medford was there from the beginning, helping me along with Dr. Digout in steering this thing, in inspiring her students to write, and helping us with financial support. Dr. Medford, thank you. And the African Studies Department for inspiring their students under the directorship of, he's not the director, but the affable, indefatigable Dr. Alem Hailu is always there with the students. He will give everything for his students. Thank you, Dr. Hailu. All right, so these are the people that I really needed to give a shout out to. Also, the judges, Dr. Digout already, Dr. Balatroa, Dr. Alem Hailu, Dr. Lopez Matthews, Dr. Shannon, she's not here, and Dr. Ivory Tolson, who is not here. And so we are going to just get into the business of, recognizing the students. We didn't even recognize the students. Sorry. From the History Department, Mr. Anton Hull. This is in alphabetic order. From the African Studies Department, Reverend, I never knew you were a father. Kanis Chiknyeka Enyaka. I've been working with this gentleman for 2 years and never knew that I was speaking to a reverend. Forgive me for all. And then you have from the African Studies Department again, Danielle Gant Huggins. Where's Danielle? Where is she? Is she here? Yeah. Thank you. And from Communications, the School of Communications, we have Faith Essene. Oh, Faith, yes, Essene. Okay, so that was in alphabetic order, and so what we'll do is that we'll begin that way, because they don't know who is first, second, or third. That's the element of surprise. So the first person to come up to do their presentation would be Anton Hull, and his topic is the enduring legacy of Howard University from concept to Black reality. Now, there's a little bit about him. Mr. Hull is a doctoral candidate in Howard University's History Department. He received his master's at Howard University, also in the History Department. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Wisconsin, Parksdale, in history, and a double minor in ethnic studies and political science. So could we welcome Mr. Anton Hull? All right.
Thank you. Good morning. Okay, my name is Anton Hull. I am a doctoral candidate in Howard University's History Department. And for my essay topic, I chose the Enduring Legacy of Howard University. My thesis is Howard's success and its legacy can be attributed to the position it occupies as a nexus between competing ideologies, American liberalism and racial pluralism, Black self-determination. In fact, the will and want of Howard University on the role it will play in Black America oscillates between these two poles. American liberalism and racial pluralism has competed with one another for dominance since the university's inception. Many Black intellectuals and race leaders were faced with the dilemma of whether to acculturate or pursue self-determination. They became either loyal advocates or bitter opponents, but they all had what was best for Black America at hand. So in 2017, Howard observes the sesquicentennial, founded in the aftermath of the Civil War and during a period of optimism. General Oliver Otis Howard and the Board of Trustees chartered the institution to instruct and develop the mental and rational faculties for African Americans. They established a school to instruct the youth in the liberal arts and sciences. The university would attract the most educated and professional African Americans of the period, as well as liberal-minded whites that would work together and transform the sons and daughters of slaves into academics, educators, physicians, and theologians. Howard University would expand beyond its original mission and for a century and a half produce Black professionals in various fields. Since its inception, Howard has been at the epicenter of the African American experience and the conduit for African American political activity. It was a point of convergence for organizations, politicians, educators, and students. It has maintained a tradition of producing an informed and effective Black leadership. Howard's enduring legacy is that it has been able to conquer its form and function. The original form of the university comprised of two buildings. These were the main building, the university building, and Minor Hall. But over time, the university would expand. Howard raised old buildings and erected new ones. For example, Founders Library now stands where the main building once stood. Over the years, not in chronological order or order of significance, Howard would include an auditorium and buildings for chemistry, engineering, and spaces for other departments. It would transcend its normal for the training of teachers and medical department functions and include history, political science, sociology, dentistry, and other disciplines. And recently, Howard University signed a deal with Google to open a campus to train Black coders. Also, form is not bound to a spattle interpretation of the university, nor is its function limited to its disciplines. They also include the aspirations and motivations of the faculty and student body. For instance, from its inception to 1926, the mission at Howard was to train teachers and physicians, However, under Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, Howard's first African-American president, 1926 to 1960, the university continued its education mission, but also placed emphasis on challenging and undermining Jim Crow. In the 1960s, Howard University's student body embraced Black Power, a cultural, political, and social economic movement that placed significance on racial solidarity and self-determination. A liberal arts university was in conflict with the prevailing and accepted racial inferiority of Africans and people of African descent of the 19th century. While General O.O. Howard was more progressive than his counterparts, these pervasive ideas also influenced many in his administration. Many in the 19th century, black and white, shared the idea of Africa as a backwards and uncivilized place. In this published manuscript, The Education of the Colored Man, General Howard used Africa as a reference point for understanding African American capabilities and mental capacity. He wrote, "The history of Africa to within 60 or 70 years present a gloomy picture, scarcely relieved of any rays of hope. From the perspective of many whites during the period, Africans were uncivilized and failed to bestow any gifts upon humanities. The enlightened minds of the time had long conceded Africans as their inferiors. Historians settled down upon the conviction that the difficulty was organic, that the great masses of speakers and writers who based their reasoning solely upon material wants and material interests of men constantly enunciated the doctrine of the actual inferiority of black men, and the utter folly of attempting to raise him to a position that God never fitted him to occupy. Therefore, in a society where white supremacy influenced opinions and interpretations, a liberal arts and sciences school for African Americans seemed like a waste of time and resources. Yet, General Howard sought to continue the work of the Freedmen's Bureau, a wartime department set up to assist African Americans in their transition from slavery to freedom. According to General Howard, until African Americans have been raised from their superstition, ignorance, and crime to high planes of development, yet with reference to Africa, it could all the time be said, darkness covered the land and gross darkness the people. General Howard and the Board of Trustees went against the prevailing attitudes towards African American education during the period. Even with the rise of pro-Southern sentiments following 1865, they raised funds, purchased lots, and organized the institution that would be Howard University. Therefore, a liberal arts school for African Americans in the 19th century was an experiment within itself. In 1867, Howard University opened its normal and medical departments. The Charleston Daily News, a South Carolina newspaper, advertised the opening of the new school for African Americans. At the time, $15,000 had been raised in the building to accommodate 1,000 students. 400 students were ready to enter. This showed that African Americans placed a great emphasis on education. While certain stereotypical ideas and interpretation of black people were a part of the institution's founding or associated with the prevailing sentiments of the period, African Americans would shape the general atmosphere of the campus and challenge the curriculum. The success of Howard University as an institution could be attributed to the will and determination of General Howard. As a trustee and president, General Howard was instrumental in launching and developing the university from its inception to the establishment of the educational structure. He was personally responsible for securing the university site. General Howard solicited donations and contributed his own money. In particular, he helped in the organization of the military, theological, and law departments. At the end of Howard's active administration, on November 30th, 1873, Minor Hall, the medical department building, and Freedmen's Hospital had been erected. General Howard was committed to providing an institution that gave a quality education to African Americans. Therefore, what seemed like a wild idea in the beginning, a liberal arts and sciences university for African Americans, had proven to be a vital necessity by the close of the 19th century. Howard University had set a standard as a quality liberal arts school. Not only did it provide professionals for the black community, but also clerical workers for the federal government. However, with the mounting racism and Jim Crow policies which sought to relegate African Americans to second-class status, Howard University will lead the fight for the civil rights and social injustice. From several accounts, the 1930s were an intellectually stimulating period at Howard University because its faculty nurtured a freer and political atmosphere. In 1926, Howard elected its 11th president, Dr. Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, educator and pastor. Under his tenure, Johnson would assemble a host of talented educators, lawyers, and scholars who would challenge Jim Crow and lay the foundation for the modern civil rights movement. In 1935, Howard University facilitated a conference which led to the development of two popular movements, the National Negro Congress and the Southern Negro Youth Congress. From May 18th through the 20th, teachers, students, politicians, and activists met in Douglas Hall for a symposium entitled The Position of the Negro, or the National Economic Crisis. This included 3 days of lectures, discussions, and sessions on achieving equality in the United States. Politically, African Americans planned to search for allies outside of the two-party system. This was due to the disinterest of the Democratic Party and the failure of the Republican Party in securing civil rights for African Americans. Lawrence A. Oxley, a civil rights activist, and who would later go on to be a part of the Black Cabinet under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would attend the conference, stated that there seemed to be 3 ways out for the African Americans: the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, or the American Labor Party. These 3 organizations planned to capitalize on the mass exodus of African Americans from the Republican Party. For Black people, the National Negro Congress, or the NNC, was seen as an umbrella organization which would cut across political alignments and philosophies and include diverse African American groups uniting their objectives in economic, political, and social issues during the Great Depression. Howard professors in the 1930s would play a large role in shaping the minds of Black youth and influencing their movements. The Southern Negro Youth Congress was organized at Howard University and emerged out of the need of African American social, political, and economic representation. They mobilized the underrepresented masses of African Americans in the South and reinforced their message through the All Southern Negro Youth Conference. In 1937, Edward Strong and James E. Jackson founded the Southern Negro Youth Congress. Jackson was a pharmacy student pursuing a master's degree at Howard University, following in the footsteps of his father, James Jackson Sr., a pharmacist in Richmond, Virginia. According to Lewis Burnham, a member of I like to also call it SNCC because it has Southern Negro Youth Congress, so we call it SNCC 1. The organization evolved out of Dr. Johnson's challenge to his generation. Johnson said, "The problem confronting the Negro youth of the South is a problem, first of all, conceiving a world which would be worth living in." And he said that would be half the task, that out of their misery, out of their hardship, and out of the dirt and corruption of their lives, the first task was to be able to conceive of a decent and clean and fruitful life, and then be able to find within themselves the resources and the strength with which to fight and win that life. Johnson's challenge prompted a response from the youth. The Southern Negro Youth Congress marked a new beginning for the African American narrative. It was a formation of an effective youth movement that focused on the injustices of Black people in the South. Furthermore, the Southern Negro Youth Congress was able to do what the American Student Union, a national left-wing organization of college students of the 1930s, could not do. They were able to attract a large African American membership. During his presidency, Johnson hired Benjamin E. Mays, Carter G. Woodson, Charles Drew, Sterling Brown, and Charles Hamilton Houston. It was under the later that the law school was revamped and a legal team for the civil rights movement was organized. To create a competitive law school, Houston eliminated the night school program. Most African American law school students earned their degrees from Howard's evening program. Johnson's father was one of those individuals that earned his law degree from the night school program. Not Johnson, but Houston, excuse me. However, Johnson supported this decision. He believed African Americans needed more attorneys of the first order. Unfortunately, the evening program was not producing them. Terminating the night school was a controversial decision. Howard alumni voiced their opposition and some law professors quit. Nonetheless, it proved to be the right move. In the spring of 1931, 2 years after Houston became vice dean, the American Bar Association awarded Howard full accreditation and approval. That winter, the Association of the American Law Schools admitted Howard to his membership. While most are unfamiliar with Houston and the role he played as a civil rights attorney, his contributions to the Black legal profession is immeasurable. On the occasion of a formal opening of Howard University Law School in 1958, Thurgood Marshall declared that not he, but Houston was the first Mr. Civil Rights lawyer. Under Houston's tutelage, Marshall would become a shrewd lawyer and litigator. The two worked together on Mary v. Maryland in 1936, a case that challenged the separate but equal in education. The Murray v. Maryland case exposed the fallacy of Jim Crow. Marshall would use it as a strategy for Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas in 1955. During the Johnson period, Howard University's form and function would change again. Instead of creating white-collar workers to diffuse negative stereotypes about African-American abilities, under Johnson's tenure, black people would be educated and influenced to change American racism and to challenge American racism and change the status quo. Howard University was a place where lessons learned under slavery and modernity and black folk culture coalesced. Sterling A. Brown, folklorist, poet, and professor at Howard University, was the bridge to this reality. He lived for close to a century, and during his time, he would have a great influence on two of the most influential movements in the United States: the New Negro movement, 1920s and 1930s, and the Black Power movement, 1960s and 1970s. While white-dominant society identified African-American art as crude and primitive, and black mores as superstitious and ignorant, Brown saw the creativity of the folk. He studied the narratives, expressions, and the music of black America. He entertained and kept company with the educated and the uneducated alike. He delved into the psyche of black America and excavated its corridors. Brown professionalized and brought dignity to black folk culture and traditions. In the 1960s, Howard University would attract the next generation of black activists and artists. For African Americans, justice and equality moved at a slow pace. Black people had minimum representation in government and lived in poverty. The socioeconomic traditions of racism barely changed. While the 1930s was active and progressive, the 1960s would be turbulent due to unfulfilled promises. Brown was still an active professor at the time. He would become the advisor to the Nonviolent Action Group, NAG, the Howard version of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The membership of NAG included Stokely Carmichael, Cortland Cox, Charlie Cobb, and Mike Thadwell. Carmichael, Black Power activist and Pan-Africanist, would abandon the interracial coalitions of the Black Power movement and become instrumental in the Black solidarity and armed resistance of the Black Power movement, bridging the gap. Equally important to Carmichael was Brown's influence on Amiri Baraka, writer and spokesman of the Black Arts Movement. He imparted on Baraka the importance of the social and economic factors of black music. Therefore, the blues and jazz became reference points for understanding black people and their history. It's hard to summarize Brown's importance. He bridged the gap between the 19th century and the 20th centuries. He was a tangible representation of the professionalization and also the embodiment of black folk. He gave dignity to black speech and treated it like it was a language unto its own. Furthermore, he showed that black cultural motifs could be used to galvanize the masses and harness black creativity. In 1968, student protests in the Black Power movement descended upon Howard University's administration building. Students were in opposition to the direction of the university under its president, James Nabritt Jr. Nabritt, the former Texas litigator, was a successful civil rights attorney who encouraged Houston in its reorganizing of the law school. However, by the 1960s, he became one of the complaints the youth had with the university's administration and the previous generation. Their gripes fell into three categories: academic grievances, black identity issues, and the strategies of the students' movement and tactical issues. The black identity issues the protesters identified alluded to the Western education that the students received. They prophesized the need for Howard University to become a black university. However, this message was more about pluralism and not separatism. These same issues and sentiments would be echoed in 1989. Howard University was founded with a mission to educate the predominantly black students who at the time could not afford a high education but was able to come to Howard and be instructed in the liberal arts. In fact, the university is like a multiverse, several realities coexisting at one time. What made Howard great and still continue to make it great are the competing ideologies that seek to control the education of the student body. Howard University has maintained a tradition of producing the scholars, academics, and political activists who would change American institutions and traditions to obtain representation and political enfranchisement for black people. Thank you.
Okay, so the next person is going to be Canis. I'm just going to call you Canis. I've been calling you Canis all the time. Okay, so Canis Enyaka is a doctoral student in the African Studies Research Department of Howard University with a focus in peace building, human dignity, governance, and development in Africa and the world. He was ordained to the Catholic priesthood 17 years ago. Reverend Canis served in different capacities of high responsibilities with positive accomplishments in both Nigeria and the United States, especially in the areas of pastoral ministry, community and individual outreach, conflict resolutions, and peace building. He is guided by his strong conviction that respect and promotion of the inviolable dignity of the human person is both the foundation and strength of a peaceful, healthy, and happy global community, where the freedom and welfare of human beings are enlarged, regardless of race, gender, religion, and social status. And I have a lot more on Dr. Canis, Reverend Canis, but I'll just present him so that he can tell you for himself.
Good morning and welcome. For my essay topic, I chose the global impact of Howard University, the case of Nnamdi Azikiwe's development at the Mecca. I would like to start with a statement by Zik himself. He said, "The realization of New Africa can only be possible by the African cultivating spiritual balance, which leads to the practicalization of social regeneration, to realizing economic determination, becoming mentally emancipated, and ushering a political resurgence." This essay revolves around, it revolves around Europe and the subjugation of Africa. Howard as a narrative of subjugation, resilience, emancipation, and renaissance of people of African descent. Howard as the new era of African leadership. Nnamdi Azikiwe as the symbol of continuity in Howard-African relationship. These are the things we keep in mind as we go through this paper. By way of introduction, Benjamin Nnamdi Azikiwe, African nationalist, the premier of Eastern Nigeria in 1954, the first indigenous governor general of Nigeria in 1960, and the first indigenous president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria in 1963, was an alumnus of Howard University who walked the holy grounds of Mecca between 1927 and 1929. He's popularly called Zik of Africa and was born in Zungeru, the northern part of Nigeria, of Igbo parents, and of course lived in Yoruba, so kind of touched the basic three ethnic major groups of Nigeria. Introduction: human interaction at the community, regional, racial, and international levels has always been driven by factors connected to economic interdependence and expansion, political diversification, demographic dispersion, environmental concern, and ideational convergence, which most people call the drivers of globalization. Historically, these factors have often been constructed by narratives of binary structures. These structures are between the strong and the weak, the conqueror and the conquered, the civilized and the uncivilized. Accordingly, the challenges of racism, imperialism, emancipation took the center stage in the domains of international relations, race, politics, and social discourse in the last couple of centuries. Clearly, The interplay between races and nations shaping global interaction, far from being based on mutual consent and understanding, was mostly imposed by the dominant powers and guided by racialist ideologies as well as the selfish interests of the powerful. During the long eras ranging from the times of slavery and colonialism to the period of the Cold War, the recurring struggles of human dignity, equality, and universal human values have defined the shared interests or visions of the African world. The founding of Howard University in 1867 as a center of academic structure by the Freedmen's Bureau of 1865 as a U.S. agency to aid freed black testifies to the dual historical forces of domination and racialism on the one hand, and the countervailing forces seeking equality and social justice on the other. Marking the Charter Day, Howard University laid the cornerstone for its 150 years of relentless commitment to truth and excellence. It is important to note the global impact of this university in shaping events and the leadership potential of its students, in training its members for the national and international task of promoting human rights and dignity. The institution was not just constrained by the conventional boundaries of race, ethnicity, and racial class. Howard extended its vision and gospel of justice and equality to all members of the human family. And all those who stepped into the Mecca carried the message of human dignity and emancipation to different parts of the world, as these values were foundational and central to its birth as a noble institution. This essay reflects on the global impact of Howard University, taking the case study of late Nnamdi Azikiwe, the first indigenous governor general of Nigeria, the first indigenous president of Nigeria, who attended this university between 1927 and 1929. The essay argues that Nnamdi Azikiwe's time at Howard played a significant role in shaping his political ideology and quest for equal human dignity of all peoples, as illustrated by the revealing words in his speech at a banquet delivered in his honor in 1954 at Howard University, acknowledging his debt to this great institution. Zik confessed, "As a crusade of human freedom in Africa, I am grateful to Howard University for helping to mold my outlook at the formative stage of my intellectual and physical development." The essay attempts to look at the founding of Howard University and how the prestigious institution at the heart of the capital of the United States shaped the political thoughts of nationalism and Pan-Africanism and independence Nnamdi Azikiwe expounded in his leadership role as one of the Africa's pioneers of political change and eventual first president following his attendance of Howard University from 1927 to 1929. It is important at this point to look at the connection between Howard and the Western historiography and the paradigm of African race. On May 1, 1867, Howard University held classes on limited but still a variety of subjects. The proposal in 1866 to establish an institution for the freed black people and, of course, for all peoples was very important to see the connection between the obnoxious activities of slavery and this noble institution. For instance, John Coleman argued that God brought slaves to America to be civilized and Christianized so that they can return to Africa and civilize their people. This ideological thought pattern preceded the founding of Howard University and accounted for the graphic and continuous subjugation of the black race. Africa, in the depiction of Kipling's 1899 poem as The White Man's Burden, gave the impression that the black race as a passive object of manipulation by the white race to be rescued and redeemed. What was not clear at the time was the Eurocentric view that denied the African people of African descent, of human agency and ability to assume responsibility for their own destiny. With this mindset and image, Europe created a unilateral rule of engagement in the continent with the notion that Africa is a global governance issue to be fixed from outside. The categorization of white as civilized and black as uncivilized became a principle of racial relationship. This dehumanizing posture in Rostow's theory of spatial dispersion, that Africa has to move from backwardness to, of course, civilized point. It showed itself in one 1820 map that presented Africa as a continent of barbarians. Also, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes in 1912, and Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness in 1899, and of course Hegel's Onslaught at the end, when Hegel said, Africa has no historic part of the world. Hugo Trevor Ruppel, who was a professor of modern history at Oxford, collaborated this when he said, maybe in the future there will be African history, but at the moment there is none. That is only the history of European in Africa. The race is darkness, and darkness is not a subject for history. With such subjugation, oppression, exploitation, and Afro-pessimist historiography, there was justification for the way Africa was treated by the West, including the 10 million Africans exported like cattle on the hoof and crates of chickens in the 3 centuries preceding Portuguese first visit to the continent. This historical evidence of how people of African descent were treated in the centuries of slavery and viewed as subhumans without any powerful intellectual ability and activities weighed against the role of Howard University's leading role in confronting this pernicious race doctrine. And this is underscored by the momentous occasion of the Charter Day that has great meaning and implication for Africa as much as the early descendants of the enslaved diaspora. The narrative of the African continent, the narrative of slaves, is deeply connected to the founding of Howard University. The role of Howard University in the education journey of young Negro minds earned this institution the name, the capstone of Negro education. It became the champion of African American intellectual leadership and mentorship with such great scholars as Kelly Miller, Carter Woodson, Ralph Bunche, Allen Locke, and many others. Howard University continues to fulfill the dreams of the founding fathers, with her alumni scattered in different parts of the world, and then Nnamdi Azikiwe has always been one of them. Nnamdi Azikiwe and the Howard Pilgrimage. Nnamdi Azikiwe, in his speech at a banquet in his honor in 1954, said, "As a crusader of human freedom in Africa, I'm grateful to Howard University for helping to mold my outlook at the formative stage." And he also said in his work, My Odyssey, he said, "Tonnell, Locke, Bunche, and Hansberry were among my teachers. They gave me an insight into the complex problems of human nature." He learned from Professor Tonnell that freedom was a universal gift that belonged to humanity as birthright, and that did not exclude in any way the Negro as a co-inheritor. Ralph Bunche taught him to deeply appreciate the importance of individual freedom and the enthronement of the rule of law as a global principle of governance and social contract. Nnamdi Azikiwe understood as valuing his personal liberty to hold constituted authorities accountable with the canon of written law, which he did so much when he got back to Africa. Professor Hansberry took him and his classmates through an intellectual journey of race relations, which helped Nnamdi Azikiwe to understand how some races were treated as equals and others as inferiors. University of Nigeria Nsukka, founded by Nnamdi Azikiwe himself, named African Studies Institute after Professor Hansberry in 1962 to recognize the scholarship of this professor and how he influenced Nnamdi Azikiwe at Howard University. From Professor Harris, Azikiwe saw the impact of economic forces on the development of the human personality. Thus, in 1928, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe declared, "I pledge that I will join crusaders for human freedom everywhere in the world, and we shall intensify the struggle for democracy in Africa." And of course, he did that. Azikiwe was true to the above pledge on his return to Africa in 1934. The Howard experience was so challenging for Nnamdi Azikiwe and inspiring at the same time. On returning to Africa, his primary concern was therefore not a territorial nationalist struggle, but a universal worldwide struggle for the black race and the human person. And when you look at the level of what people call economic nationalism and the craze and the madness for nationalism today, you think about the common dignity of the human person as Nnamdi Azikiwe fought for. Azikiwe, unlike many African nationalists of his time, was not tied to ethnic or tribal trap approach to fighting for human dignity. Thus, Azikiwe's thought is the type that thoroughly founded freedom on universal principles that could transcend race, ethnicity, as well as social cleavages. That was why he founded NCNC, a party that was not ethnic oriented like other people did in his time. The equality of life and human dignity for him transcends pigmentation of the skin. His position was that when people build their political, social, economic principles and policies on universal values of freedom, democracy, and human welfare, they achieve identification with the human community. Azikiwe's universalism is the quest for global ethic of respect for the people of African descent, as was accorded Europeans and the people from the West in general, because he had a very difficult experience between 1925 and 1993 when more than 4 African Americans were lynched, and he saw that there were different rules for different people. His 1937 manifesto, Renaissance Africa, came as a reinventing project that influenced many young people and played an important role in youth movement in Africa. The central message in Renaissance Africa, which he got from Alan Locke, the New Negro, Zeke took that and talked about the New Africa. So in his Zikism, his political ideology has 5 principles. The African emancipation, according to him, is about the spiritual balance, social regeneration, economic determinism, and not dependency, which we see in Africa today. It's also about the mental emancipation. You know, sometimes you discuss with friends and colleagues, the West is why we are suffering today. we need mental emancipation, as Frank Fanon said, and of course, our good friend from Jamaica, Bob Marley. Mental emancipation is very important for Africa today. We have responsibility, we have agency. We cannot continue to blame others. We need to make an inward journey to ask ourselves, that a president recently stole millions of dollars from government and ran away. Do you want to blame America for that? That's dangerous. So it's about that mental emancipation that is very important, and political resurgence. In conclusion, in the decades preceding slavery, after the abolition of the slave trade, Africa, categorized as non-literate Africa, was changed completely by the founding of Howard University. And Zeke, as one of the people who walked the holy grounds of Mecca, took that to Africa. Thank you.
Very, very informative. That was fantastic. Okay. The next person is going to be Danielle Gant-Huggins. Her title is Not Your Dark Continent, The Importance of Howard University in Progressing U.S.-Africa Relations. Now, Danielle is a PhD student in African Studies and a foreign language, in the foreign language area studies. She's a Flash Fellow. Danielle supports the growth of the Donald M. Payne International Development Fellowship Program as a graduate assistant, and she previously interned in the African and Middle Eastern Division of the Library of Congress. She's a native of Tennessee. Her lifelong love of learning and study abroad experiences in South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago inspired her to move to Washington, D.C., where she desires to work in the Foreign Service and help improve Africa-U.S. relationships. Danielle.
All right, hello, good afternoon, everybody. My essay topic was on Howard's influence on U.S. and Africa relations. And I framed this essay with a brief discussion on current U.S. and Africa relations, with the notion that we're all really waiting to see what the current Trump administration does in Africa. And I was writing this right after the Muslim ban, and with all the America First rhetoric, we're really all waiting to see how this manifests in international relations. And I was a little bit hesitant to frame it that way because, you don't know how the judges voted. I was like, okay, I don't want to get too political. But when I looked at the history, it was political. It was political from the first day, from the first thought of this institution. It had so many political elements. And Howard has been engrossed in the most relevant political issues of its times. Particularly at its founding, it was a response to, the quote, Negro problem, this issue of what to do with Black Americans after emancipation. And this was a political issue. To be Black has political consequences, especially across the South during that time. You couldn't vote. That was political. So it was hard to divorce those two things. And at that time, during its founding, Blacks questioned their future. The first migrations began out of the South, and with economic downturns, European immigration, and other factors, everything just kind of boiled over and led to a lot of racial tension and violence, and the general exclusion of Blacks from society. This was all fueled by the belief that Blacks were inferior, and that was intricately linked to Africa and the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. The sentiment was meant to reinforce specific power relations and social classes. I then went on to discuss Africa and how the same sort of mechanism was used by Europeans in Africa. Printing press technology advancements made it possible to mass produce knowledge about Africa that reinforced colonialism and the new economic world order that Europeans wanted to instate. So with this perspective that Europe had towards Africa, it was, of course, replicated in America, and that led to the Negro problem. Many just could not see Black people as equals. However, Howard's founders were of the strain of thought that Blacks and whites could live in peace. They believed that Blacks should be encouraged and welcomed into any church and any school. So during a time when there were many people, this was not a question of should we teach Black people? It was like, could they even learn? Could we even teach them? During that same period where people were questioning if Black people even could learn, Howard was opening its doors. And I thought that was just a beautiful thing. And this major response to the racial debate attracted so much attention. And if you look in the archives and everything, you see there were so many letters from people. Is this really true? Is there a university that let people from all ages come and all colors and women and people? People could not believe that Howard existed. And first, news spread around the country, and then you see that around the world, news of Howard had spread. The first recorded foreign students were Chinese and entered the university in 1870, followed 3 years later by a Liberian student who was enrolled in the medical department. By the early 1900s, there were students from all over the African diaspora, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and just a host of African countries and other parts of the globe. And this was considered by the leadership of Howard as divine. This was Howard's divine place. It was divine because we bring together all of these people and educate all of these people from around the world. So it was pretty beautiful to see that. Africans were particularly attracted to Howard University from all over the continent, and they chose to study at Howard, making it the Mecca for African students in the United States. I then go on to discuss how Howard has helped to cultivate many African leaders, and you've heard about that already previously, and how this is one of I'm at the doctorate level now, so I've been to a few universities. This is the only university where you can go and get all kinds of African food, right? You step outside the gate and you can go eat from all over the world. That is a testament to Howard attracting all of these African students and African immigrants to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital where policies are made. So it was here at Howard that the Negro problem got a response. Both Africans and African Americans were welcome, and they furthered their educations during a time where people did not think that Black people could even think. So it was harder for politicians on Capitol Hill to hang on to these notions that Black people could not think, when on the other hill, there's a whole host of people from all over the world that have brown skin and can think and are socially aware of themselves. It's hard to do that when your neighbor is, doing everything that you said they can't. Now, all of these African students just did not just come to Howard. Howard went to Africa, right? This was Bisons Abroad. This was a two-way exchange. And the university has, to some degree, always been internationally involved. In the 1950s, though, Howard's level of engagement increased with the continent of Africa. It was during this time that the Board of Trustees made provisions that enabled the university to fund excursions abroad. Particularly, they sent President Mordecai Johnson, which you heard about earlier, to represent the university all over Africa. He then went on to make some pretty specific and highly publicized critiques of colonialism on the continent. And like I said before, Howard has never been out, it's always been engrossed in these political issues. And so his statements garnered Howard the attention of, the Red Scare and, communism, and it made it a target for all of these individuals who looking to make political gains, I guess, off of fear. So, but as you can see, he used these trips to make claims, to speak towards Africa-related issues. And these trips also help make Howard a mecca for African students, because you see all these Howard representatives. And the number of African students increased specifically from West Africa and East Africa. In the 1960s, Howard enrolled more African students than anywhere else in the country. And by the 1990s, it was reported that 1 out of every 10 Howard students was foreign-born, and most of these were from Africa and the Caribbean. So you see, it was a two-way type of thing. Africans came to Howard, and Howard also went to Africa. And this often led to people of the Howard community taking up Africa-related issues within the United States. Study abroad trips to Africa also helped to contribute to scholarship on Africa, and that was being produced here at Howard. In fact, the university played a major role in the production of literature about Africa. And as previously mentioned, before Howard, the elites of Europe held a monopoly on the production of knowledge about Africa. Because of the overwhelming tendency of mainstream social scientists and internationalists to ignore the effects of imperialism, you can imagine that the scholarship produced by Howard, the Howard community, was crucial. They produced rich work that was supplemented by work in the field in Africa, when few American social scientists who discussed Africa had actually ever been there. Howard was able to not only produce knowledge on Africa, but collect knowledge on Africa through the Moorland-Spingarn. Once again, all of this was able to counteract the justifications that were used to benefit the elite in these, these exploitive power systems and relations. But Howard faculty were not just satisfied with producing scholarship. They wanted Howard to be a premier institution for African studies. Alain Locke's idea to begin African studies came from his research for the mandate system, a new code of empire. Despite funding setbacks, the university moved forward with its plans to provide its students with a more culturally and internationally aware curriculum. So in 1922, they hired William Leo Hansberry, who began one of the first systematic courses in African history. And this was while many places were still stuck on this notion of Africa as the dark continent. And in fact, his courses actually gained more controversy because people just could not believe that there was civilization in Ethiopia. And he got in a lot of trouble for saying something that now we know is a fact. Eventually, as Africanist scholars at Howard had argued for many years, the U.S. finally realized that colonialism in Africa was drawing to an end. So to keep up with the rising tide of color, the U.S. government rushed to launch area studies programs. So finally, Howard University had some funds that they had been lobbying for years to truly build up the African Studies program, where I'm a student currently. So I really feel blessed, and to learn this history of my department has really been very personally rewarding. And they have been responsible for bringing this diversity into what was and still is a predominantly white field of study. So in conclusion, Howard has been truly influential in U.S. engagement with Africa. Its open door policy allowed for both Africans and African Americans to dispel beliefs about inferiority through education. Howard attracted and helped produce many political African leaders who the U.S. has turned around and had to seek out and engage with. And they've come from Howard. I think that's just amazing. The Howard community has also spoken out on many Africa-related issues and produced much knowledge, most of which counters the damaging relations with the West. So this relationship with the Africa continent is clear. So this is 150 years later. If this is to be our Sankofa moment, then let us say it doesn't matter who's in the White House, because we know our role here. Our role is to be at the forefront of the engagement with Africa, whoever is over there. We have to know what we're going to do over here. All right, thank you.
That's fantastic, fantastic. All right, so our next speaker, last but not least, Faith. She's a junior legal communication student from Prince George's County, Maryland. Upon graduation, she plans to attend law school, but she's here. I don't know why I'm reading about that. She must have gone there, but now she's here. Upon graduation from Howard, she plans to attend law school and concentrate on health or immigration law. She recently interned at a personal injury immigration law firm and worked in the campaign office of DC Attorney General Carl Rasheen. When Faith is not writing, she can be found reading a variety of works with penchant for contemporary African American literature. Faith can also be found engaging in critical conversations, volunteering, or spending quality time with friends and family. Her work has been featured in the anthology Love Letters to Our Daughters and in the literary magazines Sterling Notes. As a first-generation Nigerian American, she often explores themes of cultural duality and immigration. In the future, she plans to publish a novel and collections of short stories centered on these themes. Ladies and gentlemen, Faith Esene. And she is our only undergraduate to enter.
Thank you for that very nice introduction.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. So today my essay will analyze Howard University and its relevance then and now using a three-pronged approach focused on its role as a cultural hub, the center of Black intellectual life, and a hotbed for student activism, both in the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement and in the civil rights movement. It is 1960. The air is humid. The walls of the diner reverberate with the chatter of customers gorging down greasy sandwiches and milkshakes. Within moments, there is a physical shift, a tangible force that wedges its way into the room, a silent yet formidable force. It is the force of quiet resistance, a subtle burst in the bubble of status quo. A young Stokely Carmichael emerges to take a seat on a stool. That one drop creates ripples as many other students troop into the diner and await their food. But they know that they will not be served because of their skin color, which is precisely the reason why they must take a stand by sitting down. They are students of Howard University and are bent on making a nick in the carefully polished stone of discrimination at all costs, even if the crowd tosses boiling hot coffee in their faces, even if they pour maple syrup on freshly washed tendrils of hair. At the time, Howard University had already begun sinking its roots deep into the soil of society and weaving its tenets of truth and service into the tapestry of current affairs. The institution later expanded into a springboard for student involvement in the civil rights movement and a space for the nurturing of the talented 10th, coined by W.E.B. Du Bois as that strong young breed of African Americans that would be released into the world to spread knowledge like fire, to affect change and uplift those who were not given similar opportunities for advancement. The founding of Howard came in response to a core need. The school's charter was necessary due to the vast amount of people who were freed by the end of the Civil War. If you gave a slave a piece of chalk and taught him how to etch symbols into the slab of wood and string coherent sentences together, the manacles around his feet would break. Even so, the university faced the task of breaking mental chains and helping students who were previously held in captivity transition smoothly to becoming contributing members of society at large. The school was chartered as an institution for the education of youth in the liberal arts and sciences and was founded on the idea that all people could attain success regardless of their socioeconomic status or cultural background. In fact, the The creation of the university was an act of faith in the idea that not only are all men created equal, but also that they should have an equal opportunity to develop to their fullest capacities. Education could be the great equalizer. The social activist Nelson Mandela shared similar sentiments about education, and Howard University strongly supported the struggle for liberation in South Africa. He once noted that education is the most powerful weapon with which you can use to change the world. Hence, as an institution with the goal of providing a multifaceted education, Howard University, now in its 150th year, stands perched on a hilltop, on a lampstand where it shines, and continues to produce exemplary students who impact their world. The institution's relevance then and now is grounded in its role as a socio-political, academic, and cultural hub, unfazed by the obstacles of segregation that were in full force during the years of the institution's development. Howard University has always been at the forefront of socio-political resistance. Its law school played a key role in the Brown versus Board of Education cases, which sought to desegregate public schools. This struggle involved key legal activists such as Thurgood Marshall, who became an associate justice in the Supreme Court after arguing the cases. In essence, the school served as an incubator for attorneys and legal scholars dedicated to attacking all aspects of de jure and de facto racial discrimination. The school prepared the pupils to become the heralds of justice by providing an education geared towards civil action. On an undergraduate level, the institution was a hotbed for student activism in domestic affairs and in the larger struggle of the civil rights movement. Students engaged in the Gandhi-esque mode of nonviolent protest by conducting sit-ins and diners across DC with the goal of persuading the government to pass civil rights bills for the district. Outside of these borders, those involved in the Southern Christian Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organized transportation to help residents register to vote. They did not sit comfortably in straight-back chairs, oblivious to the turmoil around them, merely absorbing knowledge so that they could be equipped with the tools needed to safely assimilate into an elite Black middle class. Rather, they used their position as students of Howard as a platform for combating injustice. In his 1967 speech to the student body, Stokely Carmichael emphasizes the role of the people in shaping a nation through political struggle and galvanizes the students to assume this responsibility. He clutches his podium and comments, "We come then to Howard University tonight. We come to beg you, to plead with you, to stand up to your responsibility and act like people who are in fact the revolutionary intelligence of our struggle. Study a little for your people. You are better than the masses that cannot read and analyze and digest concepts. Take that scientific skill, that ability to read and write, and turn it into action for the masses of our people." Carmichael's charge echoes the spirit of the times in which civil disobedience was a catalyst for change. His main premise is that one cannot engage in theory without practice and expect adequate results. Hence, the Howard University faculty of the early to mid-20th century engaged the public and the student body concerning important issues facing African Americans, thereby producing the scholar activists who walked with a pen in one hand and a picket sign in the other. Such sentiments resonate with the school's standards of truth and service that are still present today. Students harness the truth that they have learned from nuanced class discussion and use the plethora of knowledge gained from professors to serve their communities. The institution continues to remain socially and politically relevant, evident through Howard University's participation in the Black Lives Matter movement, which has garnered media attention for its bold stance. In March 2014, approximately 300 students stood with their hands raised in solidarity for Michael Brown, a victim of police brutality. Driven by a sense of urgency, they decided to stand in the gap for a citizen who would have just been another face in the sea of profuse bloodshed and myriad hashtags sprouting on social media. Much like the generations that came before them, there is a high level of social consciousness that sparks action. Students recognize that too much blood slithers on the concrete, while the blue uniforms belonging to the Swords of Peace remain blue, undyed by the leakage. And they feel compelled to advocate for such victims. As one student said of the incident, Howard University has a history of social justice, of inspiring social change. Not only are they involved in small-scale issues, but also in the larger political conversations. In January of 2017, they formed a protest against Jeff Sessions, President Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General. In response to the event, Professor Alvin Thornton, a faculty member in the political science department, noted that such acts of civil disobedience were to be expected from students at a historically black college, since Howard University as an institution is a form of protest. In addition to the school's legacy of political mobilization, by virtue of being a center of excellence that trains minorities to become substantial contributors to the world at large, the university stands as a motif of resistance because it contends with conventional notions that marginalize minority groups. In addition to its activism, the school is also a conduit for social change through its alternative spring break program, in which it spreads hope to at-risk communities by tackling issues such as illiteracy, HIV/AIDS, school-prison pipeline, and the gun violence. Such activities illustrate the institution's commitment to cultivating a culture of empathy and preparing students to become global citizens with the goal of serving humanity. The cultural continuum. The capacity to spark change in society is strongly linked to a solid sense of identity and an understanding of the space that one occupies in the world. Cognizant of this connection, Howard University not only strives for activism, but also conscientiously celebrates African American culture while embracing cultural and religious diversity through its productions in art and literature, its colorful student body, multicultural programs, and its role in international affairs, affirming its participation in the global conversation. In the early 20th century, the institution expressed strong concerns for foreign policy and issues plaguing countries overseas. And students offered their support for the dissolution of European colonial empires. Howard University administrators and faculty, such as political science professor Ralph Bunch and history professor Rayford Logan, indirectly affected policy administration through participation in conferences on Latin American issues. In the spirit of Franklin D. Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy, which sought to strengthen the United States' relation with Latin America, the university also desired to expand its international ties by awarding scholarships to students in the Virgin Islands. In addition to these programs, on a domestic level, many scholars focused on developing Africana studies and Pan-African studies programs, which were key components of political movements involving African and Caribbean independence. Policy studies were enacted to research how these policies affected Africana people within America and around the globe. These grassroots efforts bridged a cultural chasm between those in the diaspora and those on the continent of Africa. These programs were born with the purpose of decolonizing the minds of the people. Howard University continues to advocate for internationalism by hosting study abroad programs that encourage students to expand their cultural horizons. The institution organizes lectures and discussions with world leaders and cultural vanguards. In addition to its role in international affairs, the university places a strong emphasis on Black culture. Ta-Nehisi Coates, an alumnus, notes in his book, Between the World and Me, the Mecca is a machine, crafted to capture and concentrate the dark energy of all African peoples and inject it directly into the student body. The Mecca derives its power from the heritage of Howard, which in Jim Crow days enjoyed a near monopoly on Black talent. Such talent was monopolized due to the political and social circumstances that attempted to muffle the Black voice and mar its presence. But notwithstanding, Howard University continued to produce and host a plethora of trailblazers in the arts, such as Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Zora Neale Hurston, among others. Their works illustrate the nuances of the Black experience in America. Cultural exploration through the arts led to a collective awareness of Black heritage and identity, as one student notes of Sterling Brown's classes on African American music. He opened us up to the fact that the music could be studied, and by implication that Black people had a history. Through the development of programs focused on Africana studies, and Black arts, and due to the burgeoning group of artists and writers such as Amiri Baraka, Nikki Giovanni, and Melvin Kelly, a Black cultural continuum was born, which would ensure that a solid Black identity did not disintegrate as a result of societal backlash. Many years after the establishment of a black music program, Howard University developed an African music program in 1968. Such programs analyzed the social role of traditional African music and its technicalities involving call and response techniques, rhythm, improvisation, and percussion. In these classes, students encountered the modern music of ancestors long gone. In the 21st century, the institution continues to amplify Black culture through a variety of mediums: art galleries, music, drama, poetry, spoken word. In the theater department, viewers are transported from the roaring 20s of the Harlem Renaissance to the Soweto anti-apartheid riots to the bombed-out shelter of a Librarian war zone. The human stories are often more truthful, more vivid, and more impactful than historical facts and figures, because humans are not just numbers to account for the carnage of history. Rather, humans are composed of elements we cannot always quantify: soul, emotions, presence. Hence, the Howard University Theater Department maintains the institution's culture of truth by bringing to life visceral, unabridged narratives sprouting from the African diaspora. With an eclectic student body, the institution is not a melting pot in which all identities are forced to assimilate into one. Rather, it is a cultural bouillabaisse, a place where various groups converge without losing their unique aesthetics and beliefs. The diversity of the institution is also a microcosm for the growing importance of cultural exchange and the crucial role of diversity in forming a national identity. For, in Latin, e pluribus unum, in translation, out of many we can become one. Thank you.
This was fantastic. Our students did well, collectively. Let's give them all a round of applause. Now we're having a problem. Dr. Carr, tell me what we should do here. There is an activity for dissertation defense, and Doctors Hailu and Dr. Cham have to leave here by 2. What should we do? Should we begin now and people just eat, or what? Eat and talk at the same time. Okay, so all of the people on the panel, please take a seat up here. And they can bring their food. I mean, we have to. The food is in the back, so we have to accommodate these gentlemen because they accommodated us. And the defense is at 2. Okay, so we'll just go right into that. Dr. Ria says that we should give the students their awards first. Come on out, and then we'll.
Okay, I'd like to announce the awards. The first prize goes to Kenis Eniaka. The second place goes to Anton Hull. Third place goes to Danielle Gant. And our undergraduate winner, Faith Asini.
So we'll proceed. There are some beautiful bagged sandwiches in the back. And so we can all take one, come back to our seats, and we'll just begin the panel because 2 of our people have to leave and they just must go to the dissertation defense. All right? Okay, so we're free to pick up something to eat and come back to our seats. Or eat something.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this final panel here. My name is Mbye Cham. I'm in the Department of African Studies here. And it's a pleasure to be moderating this panel consisting of distinguished scholars here at Howard University who will be sharing with us their views and perspectives on this very important milestone in the history of Howard, looking at it particularly from the point of view of the sort of impact that Howard has had, not just in the United States, but beyond, particularly in Africa and the African diaspora. I'm sorry that we're dealing here with time, and Dr. Hailu and I have to leave at about 10 minutes to 2 to run to the graduate school, and I think Dr. Watkins also has a class at 2:10.
So we're going to end it quickly.
But Dr. Carr, as usual, I mean, you can actually carry the whole.
No, brother. I'm gonna come down and get in this chair.
But what we're going to do is, perhaps rather than lengthy presentations, we'll probably do it in the form of very short opening statements, and then open it up for dialogue, exchange, you know. And personally, for me, this is a very significant milestone because I think from the perspective of African studies in the United States here in particular, Howard really has been the pioneer, hands down. There's no doubt about that. 3 years ago, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the founding of the graduate program in African studies here at Howard University. This is in 2013, 60 years. Now, last year, the African Studies Association, which is the main institutional body here, organizational-wise, professional body that studies Africa here, celebrated its 59th anniversary. So you can see the ways in which Howard was really way ahead in terms of really formalizing and institutionalizing the study of Africa, in particular in the U.S. Academy. And it's a role that we're all very proud of, and I'm sure, you know, we'll probably get snippets of how this history took shape and the kind of influences it has had in shaping paradigms of looking at Africa, people of African descent throughout the world from our various panelists. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here and to moderate this panel. So we're going to go in this order here. We'll have Dr. Hailu, and then Dr. Watkins, you know, and then we'll end up with Dr. Carr. Okay? Thank you.
I want to express my appreciation to the library for organizing this. And it's a real pleasure to follow those young people fully, eloquently express Howard's role in not only in this area, not only in the United States, but in the world. And we do this for 2 reasons, I think. One is to keep the memory, to keep it for us, for ourselves, you know, how we should tell this to make sure its role is appreciated by us, but then again also by the world, because I grew up when at the time when people said, good product doesn't need any advertising. But I know good products need advertising too. And the good example for me is Coca-Cola is the most known product in the world and it's still advertised. Coca-Cola is everywhere in every village in the world. So we have to speak about the glory of Howard. We have to speak how Howard has meant for the United States, for Africa, for the Caribbean, for Asia, the whole world. To briefly just say a few words, what some of the young people pointed out today was, when we think of the time, 150 years ago, 1867, we have to remember this time was when most of the world was either colonized or under some dominant subjugation. You have Asia, you have Africa. So this was a time when Europe had emerged as the powerful geographic group in the world and took, I tell my students, until 1500, Europe was a recipient of ideas, of science, of philosophy from Africa, Asia, and other parts. But when it emerged in 1500 and after the Industrial Revolution, had a monopoly of economic power. It had also the monopoly of ideas, where it became the template for knowledge, for science, for policy. And I say this in meetings like this sometimes, just to indicate for us the power of definition, the power of telling somebody. Africa is the sunniest place in the world. In fact, I'm from Ethiopia. And they say, the tourist organization calls Ethiopia 13 months of sunshine. You have sunshine in Nigeria, in Congo, and everywhere. But how has it been depicted? The dark continent. And that is applied both to it implies to their culture, to their history. So Howard's role, it was key in redefining this, just from the very beginning, and not even before the 20th century. I remember this, my favorite quote of mine, where Frederick Douglass, in his speech, as we all know, he was and the board member here, and in a speech he gave in Philadelphia, he boldly said, Europe was in darkness when Africa had developed script and writing and all that, but that was completely forgotten and redefined. So you see the depth of Howard's contribution in all fields. I don't want to speak too long, but the one saying they have is something when something is done before something was like, I remember one conservative person talking about before conservatism was cool, he was ahead. Before cool was cool. Before Africa had value, before people of African descent were considered as human beings. We're saying late 19th century, the early 19th century, the 1920s, 1930s, when scientific racism, social Darwinism, all the way till Hitler's time in 1930s, were portraying this. Scholars here were fighting it in scholarship, and as many of the young people said here, Howard pioneered the idea of the town gown model, the engaged university, where knowledge is not considered only some accumulation of facts in a museum, but actively involved in the society. So I don't want to spend too long. We'll have a chance before 2017 happens to bring our research in similar occasions. But for now, I just want to let my colleagues speak of how Howard has been key in changing education, in changing philosophy, in changing world politics, in changing movements both in its active scholarship and engagement with the world. And I'm so glad to be part of this discussion.
Thanks, Dr. Hailu. Okay, great. Dr. Watkins? Okay.
Good afternoon. I want to add my voice to give appreciation and to thank everybody who's responsible for this program. I was deeply inspired by the presentation of the young people, and this is it epitomized what Howard represents in terms of the life of the mind of African people. Briefly, what I want to do is highlight the contributions of the Daughters of Howard to this institution's intellectual genealogy and to its global history of service. One thing I want to say is that it is truly a thing of beauty that the greatness of this university was created in collaboration across the genders. And a lot of times we are drawn into an artificial debate over which gender is most responsible, and we tend to swing from one end to the other. Either it's the men or it's the women, but it's not, that's a false choice. That really the strength, and we're at our highest power when we're working in collaboration and when we're working together, and we can see that throughout our history. And so I want to pick up a theme that people have spoken to, but I want to reiterate it in a different way. And that is that at a time when other American institutions excluded women from higher education, Howard opened the doors to the development of female intellectual energy and to them achieving their highest potential. And so even notwithstanding the fact that the founders didn't necessarily see this as a Black institution, that didn't stop us through our own self-determination and our own agency to project our own values on this institution. And so in that respect, opening the doors to women in higher education was in stark contrast to the values of the dominant culture. And it reflected the values of the Black community. And there are two scholars I would call your attention to. Shirley J. Carson did an article on Black ideals of womanhood in the Victorian era. And Bart Landry, his book, Black Working Wives. And both of those books highlight the fact that Black people are developing a different definition of womanhood. So they're not just following in lockstep with the dominant gender norms. And oftentimes that is missed because we tend to point to the dominant gender norms as the frame of reference. And so the reason I want to highlight those two articles to you is because the scholars are asking a different question, and so the voices, our own original interpretation can emerge. So one of the things that Shirley Carson says is that when you contrast the dominant culture's view about educating women and female intelligence, they felt that that would feminize women, and they felt that developing the mind or developing the intellect would develop masculine characteristics among women. And so that's why they feared educating their women. And one of it's humorous to us, but one of the things they said in terms of what they feared was that if women's minds were developed, their waists would thicken. There would be a diminution of their breast size and their hips would shrink, which would have great consequences for childbearing. And they may even grow facial hairs if they read too many books. All right, and so she has a very interesting quote about that, and she says, the Black community didn't share that trepidation about educating their women, and if they were wrong, they were willing to take the risk. All right, and so when you talk about education being a source of liberation and a source of equalizing and advancing the agenda for human dignity and human worth, then you can see that knowledge was always treasured among our community. And so when we look at the doors being open, we can see from the very beginning, the professional schools, the law school and the medical school graduated women in 1872. And two of the first Black lawyers in the United States were educated at Howard Law School, Charlotte Ray and Mary Ann Shadd Carey. In addition to developing the mind, Black women and women of African descent here at Howard University were builders of national and international organizations and institutions that were critically important and have, till to this day, great impact in touching our community. They helped pioneer a strong tradition of service, of scholarship, of sisterhood, and a tradition of uplifting and truth in service. And so we know, and this is just, I don't want to do a disservice, because if I start naming all the organizations, we would be here forever, but I'll highlight some of the sororities. We know that Alpha Kappa Alpha, Delta Sigma Theta, and Zeta Phi Beta were chartered here at Howard University. In addition to that, Lucy Diggs Slow, the first dean of one of the first permanent dean of women's here at Howard University. She was a leading founder of the organization of National Association of College Women, which today is the National Association of University Women. And what was important about that organization, it was designed to promote high standards for women, but also to begin to promote higher education for women, reflecting again the value of educating women in our community. And you see that being promoted in the community overall. And last, I would say, in terms of those organizations, you also see them engage the political questions of the day. And so the last point I would make is, if you look at the whole issue of the struggle for the vote, you'll see the Daughters of Howard play a key role. In the 1913 Women's Suffrage Parade that was here in Washington, D.C., the Deltas, Howard Women, were the only organization of black women participating in that parade. And then Mary Church Terrell and Ida B. Wells are important figures there. So we see that they are leading political engagement, that they are having a role in activism, and so we are still benefiting from this legacy and tradition, and we see a whole host of scholars contributing to that. And I know I said this is the last point, but I will be remiss to say, that many of the scholars in history that were recruited here also take a pioneering role in creating or engineering the field of black women's studies and black women's history. So Howard is still making its presence felt throughout the world in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg?
Yes, sir. And thank you, Mbye. In fact, I'm probably just going to talk about 2 minutes, and then hopefully I can say some more, and then because we can close it out, because this is the last day of class, and dissertations have to be defended. We got to see our undergrads. So I just want to add my thanks to everyone who has participated. Of course, Director Ballot Thrower, stole you wrote from the law school. I think about A.D. Mercer, and think about, the first black member of the American Association of Law Librarians came out of Howard. And there's so much more we could talk about, and we can talk about that in a moment in conversation. In fact, I just, it's very important that once again, Brother Errol is filming this, because I think about when you all hosted the 50th anniversary of African Studies down at the Library of Congress. And I often go back to YouTube to that video, and a lot of people have watched that conversation, and it was a very important conversation, and so people will be doing that for this as well. One other thing I'll say, and then maybe we can have a conversation. We can talk a little bit after, you all have to move. It was very interesting to hear the student papers were brilliant, and of course, the ancestors don't make any mistakes, so when Lopez opened us up, he really set the frame. But when that young sister Faith Esseni said, if you give a slave a piece of chalk, that metaphor is that moved me in a sense, because as Alem, as you said, we invented reading and writing. So when you create a situation where you literally take millions of people and erase their memory of their humanity in the world, and the people who did the erasing are their children. This is an absurd proposition, the idea to give a slave a piece of chalk. This is August Wilson's birthday. April 27th is his birthday. So we were going to honor Sandra Shannon, and that's why I thank SEAL, because a lot of this is really SEAL's idea, to bring together people who do work on this campus. And in that context, to give a slave a piece of chalk. General Howard, who chased Chief Seattle all the way to the Pacific Ocean, will never be a hero to me. And I'm glad that Lopez put him in the context. Sure, he thought that we were all equal, but he also thought we came from a land of darkness. The language he speaks, the opposable thumb he used to write that down, came out of Africa. So there's no way to reconcile Oliver Otis Howard with what came after. If it's up to me, we changed the name of this institution. But therein lies the challenge. I think I better stop with that, so we can have a little conversation. No, because we can get into that after, but they got to do some more work. But before y'all got to go, man, let's talk about it, because we can keep talking about that.
Okay, Greg, you just dropped something.
No, brother, it's up to me, brother.
Right. Yeah. No, as you say, I mean, there's really just so much, so much to say about Howard and the world. We can just begin to really skim the surface in such a short time that we have right now. I remember as a high school student in the Gambia, this was back in 1960. No, my memory is fading now. Okay. But this was in 1967 when I graduated from what was called, sixth form, which is, the equivalent of the 2 years after your formal, normal high school. And in our school hall, there was this big board where each year from the late 50s up to that particular moment in 1967, each student that graduates and goes to college, goes on that board there. And I remember seeing names: Forabe College, Ibadan, Cambridge, Oxford, and then around 1966-65, the name of Howard started coming up, So it was really at that particular moment that people began to really be aware in a more specific way about Howard University. And then when I had the fortune to come here in 1969, first time I was studying in France, but decided to come here on holidays. And a good friend of mine, childhood friend, who was one of those who came to Howard earlier from high school, was the one who received me here in Washington. And we walked from his apartment on 16th Street to Howard Hall. And went into this class that he was taking, and who was teaching the class? It was Leon Damas. Wow. And immediately at that moment, I just said, I am not going back to France. and that really just changed my whole perspective about everything, So, I mean, from that micro perspective, really, you can begin to see how when you multiply it and see, even before 1960s, going all the way back, to the 30s and 40s, the kind of impact that Howard has had in shaping and influencing thought and practice on the African continent in very, very significant and sustainable and lasting ways, then we can begin to appreciate and the extent of this influence, and also, more importantly, to really begin to broadcast it there. As Alem was saying, we need to really pound our own chest. This is in our traditions, I mean, traditions of self-praise. When you go to Southern Africa, these, praises of the impis, the soldiers who were part of these regiments of Shaka, I mean, really boasting about their accomplishments in wrestling, in West Africa. So these are things that I think we really need to embrace and be very, very proud of. And I, for one, I've had many opportunities to really go elsewhere, to be elsewhere, but really Howard stuck to my skin. And, I'm here, and I'm probably going to, I wouldn't say it, but yeah. But I think it's really 150 years. It's quite significant, and this particular event that we're putting up here is just something that is really quite significant, and that we're documenting it, as you say, Greg, is also something that is going to be part of the legacy of that we pass on to the next generation. So I want to thank Celia and also Dr. Leo Hansberry. We met virtually, probably when you were interviewing. I was on the, but anyway, that's another. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
You were saying, you said that there's so much to say and that we don't have enough time. And when Dr. Ballard called me into her office and told me that she wanted to do something for the sesquicentennial thing, I said, my God, where do we begin? Because it's too much to do, one event. So Dr. Carr suggested that we start with the students, get the students involved. He drops these brilliant ideas, So this is it, but then I had to speak to everybody else. So I'll tell you now, so that will, you put it in your minds, and so that everybody don't chicken out at the last minute. What we have is a series of events planned for the year. Okay? So we're going to begin in September. Dr. Carr suggested that we do this one now to get our feet wet. So in September, we're going to do something about the librarians going back in the past. And the theme is going to be what you said there, because we were talking about librarians. We didn't just come to librarianship, okay? We were the ones who started writing and libraries and all of those things. So we're going to be doing that in a whole big production in September. In October, the history department, they're going to talk about their impact on the world, the diaspora. In November, African studies, because they were impacted, okay? And then in December, Dr. Carr is going to be doing African American, and I don't know how he's going to deal with that. Then January, I think we're giving it a break because it's too cold. February, we start back again. I think theater arts, Dr. Mbye is all excited about bringing together the alumni from theater arts, because they have also, again, a significant impact on the world. And then we're going to go back, me and we're cooking up a little something with the history, with the English department. And if somebody wants to do something bright and do something in January, fine. But the year is going to be very eventful because we do have a lot to say. Okay, and I just wanted to put that out there and just remind everybody of the commitments that we made.
You want to come on? We have to leave now. You could come and moderate. Yeah? Okay? Yeah, because we have to leave now.
So who? Y'all got somebody coming? Y'all got somebody y'all get give birth to? Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
So much, Dr. Cham.
Sorry, we have to leave.
I did want to say, as my colleagues are moving, that there was, at about 5 minutes, that I did want to mention in terms of just the context of the libraries here at Howard and Howard. But Dr. Watkins has class at 10 after, so she's got a couple of minutes. Is there, so you can, if you
I'm just going to help them keep the chairs warm.
Okay. Is there, is something you want to add to what you want to say?
No, I was just going to highlight just a few of the Black women scholars because they've been a significant part of the intellectual community here. And we look in the history department, Lorraine A. Williams recruiting people, scholars like Rosalind Turboy Penn, who becomes the leading scholar on Black suffragists, people documenting the Black role in the women's suffrage movement. And that's going to be critically important to tell that story because that story hasn't been highlighted as much as it should. And 2020, we're coming up upon the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. But if we don't tell our part of the story, then we get a sugar-coated story about people who were not advocating on our behalf, but our children would be standing there clapping for them when they actually acted against our interests. And so that's why we need to document our role in the women's suffrage movement, and also the role of black men in the women's suffrage movement. Two of the leading scholars of women's suffrage, or not scholars, but activists in the movement, Frederick Douglass, and then he passes the baton on to W.B. Du Bois. And so you can read about how Du Bois writes about and advocates for women's suffrage in the Crisis magazine. We have Mertz tapes here in history, and when she's recruiting Rosa Victoria Penn, she's recruiting Elizabeth, and I'm going back to Lorraine Williams, Elizabeth Clark Lewis. As I said, they help contribute to the field of black women's studies and black women's history. And then, you know, that tradition continued with today with Dr. Edna Mepper and others here. And you can go across the disciplines and see the role of women. You can talk about Dr. Eleanor Trailer, and others. And so the bottom line I would leave us with is that Howard women, daughters of Howard, are creating very empowered models of womanhood, and we should use those models as our frame of reference. I know, speaking with Dr. Joyce Ladner, who was the interim president here, and her pioneering work on black women, on black girls, and the death of white sociology, and others, one of the things I had asked her in our conversation about that generation and their role with feminism and that kind of stuff, she's like, they asked different questions, and that allowed them to get to different answers. And so rather than using a deficit model of womanhood, they looked at how black women had agency and how their culture was a source of assuming that they were equal and not accepting other people's definitions of them per se. So I think we can use those lessons today. And so we have to tell that story, because others have certainly written the history of gender, and we have not, in our own voice, from our own cultural perspective, done as much as we could to tell it from our story, from our perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Alethia. I appreciate what you said. I think we all do, especially because the bridge that you articulate in terms of the past and where we are today, I think is critical. And, you know, it's interesting because, as we said, we think about our colleague Sandra Shannon, who's retiring this year, who 11 years ago started the August Wilson Society. And, of course, August Wilson, one of the last major public addresses he gave was right out here on this yard. He was already sick with the throat cancer that would take his life, and he stood up, gave a very short talk. In fact, it was the same year that Serena Williams got a honorary citation, and everybody was excited about both of them, but you know, more probably about Serena. You know, family members here and everything. You know, and she's had, like a lot of people in the community, people who went to Howard, relatives who went to Howard. I think about Jackie Robinson's daughter Sharon, who was just talking about being a proud Bison the other day. But Wilson stood up and he said, you know, I stand here in my grandfather's shoes. And you could have heard a pin drop. But for those of us who are familiar, of course, and many people here are familiar with Joe Turner's Come and Gone, that's the first line of the director's notes. So he basically gave a talk grounded in his work. And so Sandra, following his death, the year after his death, started the August Wilson Society. And of course, it's now all over the country and gone global. But we were going to mention that and honor her today because, you know, that society began here at Howard. And to think about the fact that August Wilson dropped out of high school, but everybody makes a big deal, and well, as well they should, of the fact that his education really was grounded in the library, the public library. And to think about that on this day, April 27th, his birthday, and to think about that in this room, in a building that served for a moment as the law school, between downstairs and the third floor, There are many ghosts in this place. In this room where they argued and debated the strategy that became Brown versus Board of Education. Robert Carter and Kenneth and Mamie Clark and John Hope Franklin, who was here for a time. And to think about that incredible work that took place literally in this room. Ms. Porter, Dorothy Porter Wesley, who upon her retirement in the early 70s, 73, you know, in this room, Charles Wesley sitting here talking, and you know, you're thinking about the people who were in this room, and now we're in this room. And so when you build that bridge, you know, think about Joyce Ladner last week, 2 weeks ago, at that podium saying that, you know, when she wrote her book, bringing together the generations, the young people who were then been recruited to Howard, like herself, Ron Walters, and when she went, she didn't tell the story that day, but she's told it before, of how she went and asked Mrs. E. Franklin Frazier if she could publish her husband, her late husband's article, The Failure of the Negro Intellectual, 1967, and she gave consent to publish that. And she put it in a book and was going to call it one thing, and then Charles Harris at the publisher, Random House, says, why don't you call it The Death of White Sociology? But the reason I put that together, because that book becomes a landmark book, anchored by Howard scholars who were then in their 30s, most of them, is that none of them would have been at Howard have not been for the man who's sitting right here, Andrew Billingsley, who brought them all here. You know, and in this very room last April, all of the people that he hired and all of their friends came and had a 3-day celebration of the Black University concept, beginning in this room. And he recruited Charles Harris, of course, to run Howard University Press. And then sitting back there is Camille Anderson, so very important to their work, who continued that. The audaciousness of a Black university press. It's without precedent. And the fact that Black Classic Press was really grounded in Howard. As you know, Mbye made it down here from Massachusetts. I'm glad she came down. But you know, I'll hide you sitting back there, and Sonia, and of course, you know, Lopez we heard this morning, but Paul Coates had the smock on. Working right here at Moorland-Spingarn, but then selling books out there in front of what became the School of Business. And grew that into Black Classic Press, a very young press with a lot of old ideas, as he would say. But he was apprenticed in this building by people like Eleanor Sinnett and Janet Wood Sims Wood. And these sisters especially, Karen Jefferson, who's down in Atlanta now at the AUC. I mean, this is a living tradition. And we talk about Ralph Bunche and Merz Tate. And we talk about, of course, I'm glad you mentioned Mary Ann Shadd, because people don't never necessarily connect her to Howard the way she should be. Charlotte Ray didn't talk about it all, but you know, and then somebody had the good sense to finally honor Pauli Murray on this campus, which is long overdue. And I think even as they're talking about honoring her, the people are still reading from Cliff Notes to say who she was. Pauli Murray was ordained as a saint. She is a saint, technically, in the Episcopal Church. Saint Pauli Murray. So, but the idea, I guess what I'm saying is that we talk about those ancestors, but the bridge between them and us is often kind of recedes, because I think, and this is what I wanted to say, because you know, we talk about 150 years, and if you went to Charter Day, you know, you said they did the 3 iterations. But Howard can't tell its story because we still haven't given ourselves permission. They did it in 50-year increments, and I think that's about right. I think that first third we can think of maybe as the dream period. Because when that child said to give a slave a piece of chalk, that really hit me, because, you know, what does it mean to propose a university that is unrestricted by race, by gender, so everybody can come? Well, very quickly, that university is going to turn non-white in America, because white people don't believe in that. That's a dream. The American dream, which is always a hoax, as we heard from Lopez this morning when he talked about the complicated history of General Howard, who enriched himself, almost a Trumpian move in the 1860s and 70s, who enriched himself greatly. Or as Russell Adams used to say upstairs on the 3rd floor in the African American Studies Department, he did well while he was doing good. But, you know, so yeah, you may have thought that black people are equal as a kind of conceptual thing, but you also thought that you could make a profit. He didn't build no black companies, and yeah, maybe there should be a black president, but John Mercer Langston, these people are imaginary figures. Here's a man who ran the university for 2 years, and when they wouldn't give him the presidency, he leaves and comes back as a congressman. I mean, who does that? But you started an enslavement. There ain't no white people can match the history of African people in this country. But when we got a piece of chalk in our hand, we began to remember Richard Wright, whose mother walked him out of a field in Cuthbert, Georgia to Atlanta. And so General Howard goes down there and says, oh, what do you want us to tell your good friends in the North? Talking about these white people. Little Richard Wright, a little boy, said, tell them we're rising. This is the thing. And so, you know, this little boy grows up to be the president of Savannah State and goes down on Capitol Hill and tells the United States Congress, while you people were in caves, we invented mathematics. We invented writing. And they don't know what to do with him. He said, but you know, and then he cites all these white scholars, the Greeks and the Romans, and he says, if you don't believe me, read your own sources. And then he leaves. Well, I guess what I'm saying, Howard is accidentally great. What do I mean? Because Richard Wright was never the president of Howard University. Richard Wright was president of Savannah State. In Savannah, every black college in the country could have a conversation like we're having. If we were at Tuskegee, they'd be talking about how the sisters who were working in the library at Tuskegee put books in the hand of Ralph Ellison and then put in his buddy, who he then became friends with, because every time that Albert Murray would check out a book at Tuskegee Library, he would see that some dude named Ralph Ellison beat me to it. And that turned into a friendship that lasted forever. If they were at Wilberforce, they'd be talking about Hallie Quinn Brown. And they were talking about, you know, how Martin Delaney and Catherine Delaney put their stuff there, and then a fire burnt the place down, and a sister in D.C., Elizabeth Keckley, who had stolen a piece of hair off of Lincoln off his deathbed, sold the hair and used the money to refinance the building of Wilberforce after white people burned it down in Ohio. Every black college has this story. So what makes Howard unique? It's our scope, it's our scale, and it's the concentration. It's the critical mass. We're all the same everywhere, but we take pride of place in part without having earned the narrative. We had to tell the right story. They didn't start this as a black school. We took this thing over. In that first 50 years, that dream recedes into the second third, which is kind of like the new Negro period. We heard that in the papers. Now you got a problem. Zona Hurston says she's not going to chapel. I'll worship, but I ain't going mandatory. Elaine Locke is Baha'i, so when Carter Woodson is forced as dean to go take attendance, he balks. That's in the archives. Y'all got that at Moorland-Spingarn. He says, I can't do this, so he leaves Howard and goes to 9th Street. Howard has a record of marginalizing revolutionary impulses. And the people we celebrate after they're dead were persecuted when they were on this campus. Ernest Just was too sick to teach his classes. All he wanted was a pension. Mordecai Johnson told him, if you want your money, you need to come on off the hill, and he died. And so what I'm saying is that that's not an indictment of anyone. That's what I'm saying. It's because that same Mordecai Johnson would then stand in the gap between the red scare people and people like Doxy Wilkerson, who pioneered in adult education with Elaine Locke, who wrote about how you educate adults. So I guess what I'm saying is that during that new Negro period, there was real constant debate. And then integration came, segregation ended, and we're in the third period now. As Du Bois said right out here on this yard in 1930, you got to be a black college. And then he went to Fisk 3 years later and gave his speech to Field and Function of Negro College. He said, what is a Negro university in America? A French university is French. An English university is English. But what is a Negro university in the United States? And we're still trying to answer that question, because once desegregation came, it dropped the hedge and all the elite Negroes could back away. The only people at Howard are the people who want to be here. Because everybody else is looking like, why in the hell would you go to a black school when you have options? Or as they told me when I came out of graduate school, why would you ever want to go to Howard? You could get a job at a good university. And I'm sure everybody in here has heard some variation of that. Well, that's because after segregation, people facing the daunting task of making a people out of a historical set of accidents and imagination, most people are not up to that task. So when you come in this building, when you come in the Founders Library, you're coming to a place where people came because they said, we've got to move not just on our behalf, because we could get out. We got to move on behalf of a people who are now going to have to be convinced that they're worthy of being moved for. That's an impossible task. And I say right up to this very moment, many people on this campus are not up to it. But the simple fact that we, and I include myself in that, all of us are here simply because we have decided that we can't bear the alternative, which is quitting. So we endure. So that's what I'm going to say. I know you guys so Celia, could we come down? Should we talk, sir?
We could come down like
could we? Please.
Yeah, yes.
Look, what time you gonna put a back end on this? It's 2:20, 2:50. No, yes you do, because we got school.
You know when the brother starts, and we like to hear him, so I'm not putting no time on him.
No, I'm done.
So what are we gonna do?
No, yeah. Were there secrets in there? Oh, I didn't even talk about Leo Hansberry. That child, she gave that paper about Hansberry. They sent Hansberry to Egypt so the Ford Foundation could give Elaine Locke and them their money so they could get him out of African studies because he was so radical. They let him, really, that's the birthday. And we know that, right? Wait, isn't that the truth? They gave him, rather than let Leo Hansberry be the architect of African studies at Howard, they figured out a way to finally let him get to Egypt. The Egypt he'd been teaching about here since the 20s in Ethiopia, in order that they could hopefully align African studies with a more conservative bent. And so Elaine Locke participated, what's his name, E. Franklin Frazier participated. They gave most of the money to Northwestern. They did not give a little pittance to Howard. And out of that little pittance, they still figured out a way, which is why every time Gail Hansberry, Leo Hansberry's daughter, who comes here more often, his other daughter does too, but anytime Gail Hansberry comes in this room or anywhere else in this campus to sit, she gets pride of place. Why? Because the evasion of her father is a crime that Howard has still not answered for. And it's just one of the many ongoing crimes anyway. But we should probably not spend too much time here. Anybody, I know, probably you want to say something.
Anybody has anything to say, any questions or anything?
I have something I have
Please.
to say, only because I'm not sure if you realize what you've done. And I'll just say it because how I saw it. First, I saw in your students, I saw 2 women and 2 men. I don't know if that was intentional.
What was your students? African studies, man.
Yeah, but they were students that were children.
Our students, no question.
I saw 2 women and 2 men. I saw 2 African-born.
Yes.
And 2 African-American-born.
That's true.
But not only that, they presented scholarly papers in a room where I don't know if there's an African writer in any of these books.
Just bodies, brother.
I don't know in any of these books.
This British parliament.
And here
No, this is a debate on where our bodies went. That's what we surrounded by.
So now, in this room, we have expanded the scholarly knowledge exponentially.
Yes.
And I don't know if that was intentional, but we continue to talk about, we are hearing stories about Africans from non-Africans, but now we are producing scholarly papers.
Yes.
If we continue to do anything, I would hope that every time you do that you do what you just did, that we produce scholarly papers. I'm not against protests. I think that's important. But they don't last. They're not read. They're not studied. They're not referred to as scholarly papers. And how we are adding to the scholarship by virtue of what you've done. On your panel, you had 2 Africans and 2 African Americans. So I just want to say I applaud you, Dr. Carr, and Dr.
Ballard.
Yes, and Alem and Celia. Thank you. Do not stop. I have heard you. For 100 years, Howard ran from its Africanness. 100 years, it was running toward Europe.
Are you counting to now?
It was, and then it began to turn where we began to make baby steps to Africa.
Yes, sir.
The one commonality is Africa. It's either African American or African, but it's Africa. And we are starting to move emotionally, philosophically to Africa. And to lift that up as opposed to running away from it and saying it's something that we should be ashamed of. We are finally saying that it's something that we should lift up. It is not the continent of darkness, it's the continent of sunshine. We're beginning to change the narrative. It's small, but we're beginning to do it. So I just want to applaud you for doing it. I know some of this was not probably even intentional, but I just want to say it's a great work. Don't stop.
Well, once again, I say very quickly, man, that thank you. Not only for that, but for the work you're doing and the students that it's helping and producing. And I think that particularly given the fact that most people in this room work in this building, the ears that is falling on in real time, in addition to all the people that will watch the video, but especially the ears that's falling on in real time, I don't know how that makes y'all feel. Exactly what you said, because I know how it makes me feel. I mean, when you say that, I think about Lopez, you know, who's written on the Southern Youth Movement and the Southern Negro Youth Congress, and the debates. And when Anton, when you mentioned that 35 convening here, and how the communists are trying to make inroads into the black community. I think about 6 years later, when A. Philip Randolph calls the March on Washington and then calls it off, and Mary Bethune and them are like, what the hell's wrong with you? And they meet right there in Rankin Chapel and have a 3-day conference on what do black people need. These are the black women. Because Bethune and them was like, just because you called the march off, you ain't in charge of all the black people, Randolph. So we're going to come anyway to Washington, and we still need to talk about what we're going to do. And the reason I say that is because there are proceedings. All that stuff is in our archives. So I wonder how it makes archivists feel for us to have to remind ourselves, particularly young people, I think, and this is our obligation as teachers on this campus. Because our young people, and sadly a lot of other people, but especially our young people, have no idea that not only these things happen, but that they are literally in this building to be read and discussed. Every year every 2 years, the social science division will have a conference, and then you go right upstairs, not even in special collections, but just in the books on the shelves here, unless, oh my God, they've been thrown away or sold, because I find them in, are they online? Oh, see, of course you put them online. Okay. Yeah. No, because I mean, when you look at the people who presented, it's Du Bois. I mean, and they're right over there in Rankin Chapel. I mean, it's blowing my mind. You just read these little articles, you read these papers, and you realize and then you see just how close what you just said is to what they were saying in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And then Sterling Brown, and then Elaine Locke, the Library of Congress, asked him to do something, so he gets a couple of his buddies, and Brown, of course, notorious for not writing. But why are y'all critiquing Sterling Brown for not writing more? Because he does put together these bronze books, and you know, Ralph Bunche does a worldview on race, Sterling Brown does one, you know, Elaine Locke is but Brown would have probably written more if he wasn't spending all this time with these young people. And for Brown, Africa is there. I mean, Elaine Locke's work on the concept of Africa and culture is still ignored by Negroes who are now getting PhDs and publishing books. Some of them come on this campus and give talks and should be ashamed to open their mouths. Because we should be ashamed for not raising our hands in this very room that happened. Alan Taylor won the Pulitzer Prize for a book talking about black agency called The Internal Enemy, and he stood right at this podium, and after he was finished, my hand went up first with Michael Winston sitting there. Why? You want to defend your boy? Let's have a conversation. Why? Because Gerald Horne just wrote a book 10 times better than that. A lot of that research was done right downstairs, but white people don't give Gerald Horne awards. They gave you an award for what Du Bois would call a twice-told tale. So I'm just underscoring what you said. What we do the work, I think a lot of times what we don't do as good as, I shouldn't be critical. I don't make it sound like a criticism, but even though it is a criticism, there's something bigger, and I can't grasp the concept to articulate it at this moment. But as these kids come in here, because it's college tour time, and all these young people come in and look through the case and go, hey, stop. Do you know what that is? I did that last week with a child. I said, how many of y'all know Langston Hughes? She said, that's my favorite poet. I said, look at this piece of paper right here. She said, oh, I too sing America. No, slow down. You know that poem? Yeah, no, that's the piece of paper. He wrote it out. Do you understand? But anyway, the point I was trying to make is that those children, the students in our classes, don't get the connection between what they are doing and what happened here even 10 years ago.
Or if I could just interject.
No, please.
we've got to help
Yes, that's.
Dr. Billings finish his work.
Why is he sitting there?
Because
we called him up. Remember that? We called you up and said, we got room for you, brother. That's exactly right.
history, that history.
That's right.
He is about ready to publish.
That's right.
And the young people don't know that many of the black professors that came here during his tenure in the administration.
No, they don't. Young people, the people on his faculty don't know that.
They don't know.
That's right.
That's why he is here, and that's why he gave his papers here.
Right.
As opposed to somewhere else.
Because Janet Sim Wood had to go research Dorothy Porter at Yale because they sold them in small auction. No shade on Connie, I'm just saying.
So we need, and I don't know if we need to have our own publishing company again, but we need support.
I'm just saying.
And thank you for mentioning his role.
No, that's the man right there. Go ahead.
Okay, Anton.
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment.
Please, brother.
Another thing I believe that we really have to think about is the employees, the janitorial staff, and all
Yes.
these other individuals who are sort of like folk historians. They're like curators to tell us who all traversed on campus, who came on campus, who was here, what took place. And that was one of the things how I discovered Sterling Brown was I came up looking for you one day and I bumped into Ethelbert. And he's like, oh, he's not there. So, just curious, well, what you doing? So I went and we started talking about Africa and poetry, the Caribbean, America. He's like, man, you ever heard of Sterling Brown, brother? I was like, no. Man, he's a bad brother, man. I was like, so he started pointing books to me. And then as I read Sterling Brown, and I read the Negro Caravan, I began to make connections in response to like the culture, the identity, the folk, and all these other stuff. I discovered High John the Conqueror and all these other motifs that African Americans produced under slavery in order for them to survive in an oppressive society. So it's like if the children, when they come in and they have no like one to talk to, I know Dr. Woods here, Hailu here, Dr. Taylor's here, and they're rolling across campus and they say, how you doing? And create these discussions. Some of these kids may not never know about what took place here.
That's right.
A lot of them are not open. They don't want to interact.
That's right. No shade on Henry Louis Gates, but when you said that, man, Arthur P. Davis, the foundation for the anthology. This isn't calling all your friends around the country. This is going next door and say, hey, man, you want to contribute something to the new Negro, right? Elaine Lott. Of course, that was the year the white man had fired him before they brought Mordecai Johnson in, so he actually finally had a year to put together the anthology. So when you look at when the new Negro was put together, unfortunately, Locke had to leave it to do it. But to your point, who connects these young people as they're working on anthologies? Who's working on these new syllabi and things? The teaching, Sterling, y'all got Sterling Brown's papers. And it's just like, wow, which includes course outlines, course notes. Those notes alone. It should be, there are 14 volumes of the Garvey papers because, of course, Brother Hill was able to get UCLA and now Duke, they got money. But there should be volumes of the Brown paper. Wait, say, Lopez? Huh?
Henry Tolbert over his.
Oh, of course. Well, yeah. And see, it's interesting. When I got hired here in 2000, some people like, why would you go to Howard? I feel like John Hope Franklin felt, although I ain't going to Brooklyn College. This is later after that. But he said, you look at Howard as the end of your career job. Like, this is the thing that Negroes used to aspire to. So the idea that I would get hired at Howard, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to Tuskegee. I was thinking about Tuskegee. But my point is that when I came, there were a lot more elders than there are now. And I would just find them because these people were legends to me. I never met them. Emory Tolbert was one of them, man. I would go just sit under Emory Tolbert. Little monograms like the UNIA and Black Los Angeles, man. Stuff like that, man. And he started talking about working on the Garvey papers, man. I'm not saying, I just talk, man. I don't care. And then to find out all the stuff about him being Seventh-day Adventist and all these stories about Little Richard and stuff like that you don't hear about. And then all this other stuff. And he was a bibliophile. Come on, man. No. That's right, Janet Sims Wood the whole time. This is somebody, I just had all her bibliographies. You know what I'm saying? So, do you know Linwood Davis? I mean, I would be asking questions about other Billy. Oh yeah, that's my friend. And then, wow. So a lot of those elders aren't here. And then some of them are still here. Eleanor Traylor is still walking around. Leslie Hicks, I don't know. Leslie Hicks comes to work. He retired years ago. Leslie Hicks came here because a man died shoveling snow and they had to get a replacement for him. The guy was Francis Cecil Sumner. That's the man they say is the father of black psychology. You know what I'm saying? And then Leslie Hicks comes in to teach. My point is that when we have elders on this campus, to what you're raising a little bit, it's imperative for us to talk to them. And you're right, Anton, the elders aren't just the professors and the librarians. And the elders are the cats that clean up around here, who mow the grass, who will be out here in a minute to paint these bumpers because they do it once a year. They're going to be out there with his roller next week. And he's seen everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, you make a very important point. Yeah.
All right.
You can hear one more.
Last,
Oh, yeah.
and then
I'm really still taking a lot of this in, and so thank you all very much. What comes to mind is that we really are at a crossroads.
Yes.
And it's not the kind of crossroads that Cruz spoke about in terms of the crisis of the Negro intellectual. I think it's the crisis of the talented tenth. And the student made a reference to Du Bois and coining of the talented tenth, when actually it was coined by Morehouse, whom Morehouse is a white guy who was really,
Henry Morehouse.
Yeah, talking about another
American Baptist Home Mission.
talented tenth, more aristocratic, which Du Bois, yes, did then take in and try to shape it and apply it in a way that would be more useful for us. But at this point in time, we're faced with a similar type of crisis for the talented tenth, and that crisis is sort of in the light of the 5%ers who have, in essence, taken over the intellectual discourse through appropriating the oral culture, and as well, bringing the youth and the next generation along and speaking to them, in a new idiom. I don't want to say too much more, but I think that I'll be very interested in seeing how in this next year, we can deal with this matter of the crisis of the talented tenth, and how the scholar activists like Du Bois, or you mentioned Ladner, you mentioned Woodson, how we really deal with this, not just in terms of a place and the institution and the people who come to that, and how it extends and impacts into the broader society and other institutions, of the African American nation.
Well, I just say this very quickly. One thing is, I think, particularly for young people, if they've never seen it, then they don't know what it looked like. And I say that to say that, I remember every spring, certainly when I came here, by then I think Swigert had been president 4 or 5 years, but every spring up until fairly recently, there was a reception in this room for folks who had published something in the previous calendar year. And toward the end of that regular event, the Thurkill family, remember, Celia? The Thurkill family gave some money for student essays. So what we saw today was a regular event, the Thurkill essay contest. And the essay had to be about the history of Howard University. And so what you found is it began to build momentum, and then somebody came up, I think it must have been the library staff, came up with the idea, let's award the Thurkill essay winner at the recognition of of faculty authors. And so, and every year they would do a poster, and if you publish something, you got your name on the poster, and the students then would come because the student essay competition winner would be announced, and this room would be packed. And of course, that's a small group, and it shouldn't just be, obviously, a lot of folks want to spend going, a lot of people in the library system publish. So it wasn't just faculty, but my point I'm raising is because you raised something very important. literacy culture is being reformed in front of our eyes. YouTube is 11 years old. It ain't even 20 years old. It's hard for like young people to, they don't remember before you. The kids in middle school have no idea. They on Snapchat. They've gone past Twitter and all that other stuff. But if they come in a room like that, it becomes fascinating to them. And then and we reestablish that culture of scholarship as a mundane thing. And at the center of the heart of any great university is its faculty. And the heart of any great university's heart is the library. So we can no longer treat this as a peripheral thing. It has to become the center of intellectual life on this campus. And that means then we can bring these 18, 19-year-olds in here because something is always going on, and then invite them in. Now, but here's the thing. You can't just talk. You gotta write a paper. And then come to your point. And I know they will do it, but they will not do it as long as it's just us. Because when you do that, what Ayikwe Arma say, when you put spring water in the desert absorbs it. You can't do it one or two people. It has to be an institutional change. Otherwise, we just get broken, because I'm about to go get broken in a minute in this class, where these kids are, they got papers and you read them and like, did you? It can't be one or two people. No, seriously. But and this is the last thing I said, because you raised something very important. It can't be one or two people, and I don't think that the faculty should be the singular kind of force trying to push that. Everybody needs to turn and look at the library system with founders at the center, and Stokes and the law library and social work right over there, and the School of Business restored in some way, and all the little places that people don't necessarily go in because they don't know. The architecture library evaporated. A little quarter of it is upstairs on the 3rd floor in our little 300A. But I remember when those books got flooded because I teach in that building. In other words, it's like now there's no books in the, how the hell do you have no books in the damn architecture? Like, in other words, we have to draw the line now. And the line has to begin with this building and this system. And I think then we invite our students in. Otherwise, we just whistling in the wind.
Well, I think...
All right, I'm
sorry,
going to have to stop you, brother.
Time to go.
Yes,
thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for this fantastic, spirited conversation. And, thank you all again for coming out. And this is just the beginning. As I said, we're going to continue this thing all year. Okay? So, Professor Ballard, do you want to say something?
Please. You got to say something.
All right. Come on. I just want to reiterate, as I said before, I think what made this such an amazing event is that it was the culmination of all of the units, and we worked together, and we, celebrating our students and scholarship, because that's, to me, is what universities are supposed to be about.
Yes.
So thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for believing in me. She doesn't even know.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Oh boy.
See you.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Which means